It all began one evening at our regular dinner table when my oldest son, Brad, announced he had something important to share with me. I'm Mary, 51 years old, and I work part-time. Mentally, I still feel youthful, though my body is showing signs of aging. My 3 sons, who have grown up to compensate for my diminishing energy, are my greatest pride. Brad, the eldest, has decided to tie the knot. While I knew he had a girlfriend, hearing about their engagement was still a pleasant surprise. So, Brett's getting married, huh? I guess that means you're getting old, honey. No beer for you tonight then, my husband joked. Ignoring his jests, I focused on Brad's expression. With our other sons away at college, Brad, now working, was the only one still living at home. His maturity had flourished in his years of employment, and now, with marriage on the horizon, he seemed more steadfast and reliable than ever. After my husband tearfully apologized to me, saying, "I'm sorry you're forever young and beautiful," I allowed him just 1 beer, according to my son. They were already discussing wedding venues and ring options, though the actual date was undecided. Brad wanted to bring his fiancée over to meet us first, which felt like a significant step. Marriage is a big milestone, I mused. I want them to have a wonderful ceremony. Though the stars of the day would be my son and his future wife, I couldn't help but feel a flutter of excitement. Perhaps I'd even treat myself to a new dress, reminiscing on my own bridal days as my husband continued to praise how radiant I looked in white. The weekend arrived, and Brad's fiancée, Alice, greeted us casually. "Hello, I'm Alice," she said, her demeanor reflecting the easy confidence of youth. Alice, a part-time worker at Brad's favorite cafe, had been captivated by him and pursued him until they began dating. As conversations lulled, my husband leaned in. "Ah, yes," and I nodded in agreement. "We have something important to share with you, Alice," my husband continued. "Brad isn't our biological son." Alice's eyes widened in surprise. "He's my nephew," I explained softly. "Brad's parents, my brother and his wife, tragically passed away when he was young. We adopted him and raised him as our own. He's like a son to us," my husband added warmly. "Please take good care of him." As Alice processed this revelation, a brief silence hung in the air before my husband swiftly changed the subject to lighter matters. "Well, let's leave the heavy stuff there. What kind of ceremony are you envisioning?" Alice smiled gratefully at the change in tone. "I'd love to wear a traditional white wedding dress, if possible." Glancing at Brad, who beamed in agreement, I couldn't help but share in their excitement. "That sounds wonderful. It's a once-in-a-lifetime event, so it should be perfect for the bride." At that point, Alice made a peculiar expression. For a moment, I thought she was glaring at me, but perhaps it was my imagination. Before I could dwell on it, her face returned to its usual expression. "And what about you, Brad? What kind of wedding do you want?" my husband asked, trying to involve our son in the wedding discussion. "Well, we don't really need your opinion," Alice immediately interjected. "What?" The 3 of us were taken aback, exchanging surprised looks. Alice seemed puzzled by our reactions, as if she couldn't understand what was wrong with her statement. "But didn't you say yourself, Auntie, that it needs to be perfect for the bride? The groom is just a bonus." "I'll have it my way," Alice asserted confidently, her smile radiant. Brad was left speechless, and I was momentarily stunned by her addressing me as Auntie. But shouldn't Brad's wishes also be considered? "Don't worry, leave everything to me, and it'll be the best wedding ever. Just make sure you work hard and contribute the funds, Brad," Alice continued with unstoppable energy and audacity, leaving us all speechless. What a remarkable girl, I thought, nodding in agreement. A few days later, both families met at a nice restaurant. This time, my husband's mother was there too. She hadn't been able to join us last time because she was at an adult daycare center. Despite using a cane, she was quite energetic. "Sorry for the delay. Traffic was a nightmare," she apologized as she arrived. Alice spoke in a casual manner, even with my husband's mother, whom she had only met once before. In the background, I noticed Alice's parents shyly waving before taking their seats. The atmosphere was somewhat awkward, with little conversation as we quietly ate our meals. Just as I was about to initiate some small talk, Alice suddenly spoke up. "Granny, do you have trouble walking?" "That's right, dear. Old age has taken a toll on my legs," my mother-in-law replied. "Well, I absolutely refuse to care for you," Alice declared out of the blue, causing a moment of stunned silence. Someone went, "Hell, it was probably my mother-in-law, but it might have been me," I said, wanting to clarify. I have no intention of caring for any of you. Auntie, you're not my mother, so you're a stranger. And while Uncle might be related, he's not my father. I won't look after any of you, Alice asserted boldly. Hey Alice, Brad attempted to intervene, but she wouldn't relent. And I definitely won't be calling you Dad or Mom, so remember that, Alice added firmly. Glancing at Alice's parents, I was surprised to see them nodding in agreement. Well, it's true that Brad isn't our biological son, but we've raised him as one. My husband tried to interject. Hush, Uncle, Alice cut him off sharply. Okay, I'm sorry, my husband fell silent after the rebuke. At that moment, the gentle sound of a fork being placed down resonated. Is that so? Came a calm but firm statement. I glanced at my mother-in-law. She appeared composed, yet her underlying fury was palpable. They may not be their biological parents, but they've raised them with more love than many real parents would. That's not something outsiders should meddle with. My mother-in-law spoke with authority. I don't care what you say. I'm not doing any caregiving, Alice retorted defiantly. Her words infuriated me, but I held my tongue as my mother-in-law continued to speak. I'm not expecting anyone to take care of me. I know I'm old, but I don't want to burden my daughter-in-law, so I mostly use the facilities every day. Oh, really? Responded my mother-in-law. I've already transferred my assets to the couple as gifts while I'm still alive. They can use that money for the facilities or whatever they want, so you won't have to lift a finger. Well, isn't that nice? My mother-in-law replied with irritation evident in her tone. Even when her son tried to placate her, it seemed to have little effect. This discussion ends here. It's time to go home, my mother-in-law stated firmly, bringing the conversation to an abrupt close. With that single statement from my mother-in-law, the meeting came to an end. Women have become stronger these days. Perhaps that's the way of the world now. The rest of us, born in the 60s, returned home with mixed feelings. A few days later, my husband and Brad were at work, my mother-in-law was at the adult home, and I was alone at home on my day off from my part-time job when the phone rang. Oh, hey there, Auntie, Alice's voice surprised me when I picked up the phone. Auntie, can you not come to the wedding? Alice's request caught me off guard. What? I exclaimed in surprise at her unexpected request. You're not Brad's biological parent. Technically, you're his aunt. Since there's no blood relation, you're essentially a stranger. Strangers shouldn't come to weddings. But what about Brad? He wants us, his parents, to be at the ceremony, I pleaded. He doesn't matter. I'm planning the wedding my way. At the ceremony, I'll prepare a letter to his deceased parents that will surely move everyone, Alice insisted. That's not how it works. Brad's biological parents were important to him, but he considers us his real parents. That thought brought tears to her eyes before. I explained desperately. If you really want to attend, you'll have to be very generous with your gift. You received an inheritance from your mom, right? So, $10,000 is the bare minimum, if that's the case. I might let you sit in the far corner of the relative seats. How could you say such a thing? If you don't like it, fine. Don't come to the wedding. Oh, but you still have to give a gift. Wire transfer or registered mail is fine. Bye, Alice declared curtly before hanging up. The phone call felt like a whirlwind, leaving me unsettled. That night, Brad was working late due to overtime, and my husband was out for drinks. It was just my mother-in-law and me at home, contemplating the situation in silence. Looks like Alice doesn't like me, I remarked with concern. That's a problem, sighed my mother-in-law. Let's make her like us then, I suggested plainly. Simple and clear. If she dislikes us, we'll make ourselves likable, my mother-in-law agreed. And so, we stayed up late into the night, plotting various strategies. The sight of us grinning with satisfaction and saying, "Perfect, let's do this," left my husband dumbfounded when he returned home, but that's another story. The next day at lunch, when I called Alice and told her we had something for her, she came over promptly. Here to collect some cash, I joked as she arrived. Shaking my head at her assumption, I pulled out something. "What's this?" Alice asked, puzzled. "It's a cupcake I made," my mother-in-law chimed in with a smile. "I heard you don't have grandparents. Try some of this. It's a super traditional one." "I don't want it," Alice protested. "Don't be shy. Here you go," my mother-in-law insisted, pushing the treat towards her. Alice resisted, but my mother-in-law's assertiveness prevailed as she managed to get the cupcake into Alice's mouth. Well, that's gross. Why is this so salty? Alice exclaimed, quickly washing it down with the iced tea we had served. Salty? That's odd. It shouldn't be, I remarked, taking a bite myself and grimacing. We had entrusted everything to my mother-in-law, including the preparation and cleanup. But who could have predicted such a basic mistake? The cupcake plan had failed, but we remained undeterred. That's all right, let's move on to the next one, I said with determination. I have a gift for you. Wedding money? A gift card? Nope. Alice eyed the slightly larger paper bag I handed her, disappointment creasing her forehead as she inspected it. What's this? It's a dress. I hope you like it. It's gross. This isn't my taste at all. I would rather have money. Money? Alice bluntly stated her preference, making me reconsider giving it to her. I had carefully chosen the dress, thinking it would suit her well. Not having a daughter, I wasn't entirely familiar with current fashion trends for young women. Despite consulting with the store clerk, it seemed my efforts had fallen short. A real letdown. Another plan had failed, and instead of bringing us closer, it seemed to worsen things. That's enough. I don't want anything else. Just give me the cash, Alice demanded. A cash gift truly captures the spirit of celebration. Don't you want to celebrate your son? Of course. I do. Then I'll give it to my son. The wife should manage the husband's money. That's only natural. Just hurry up and hand it over, old woman. As Alice spoke, her true nature emerged, leaving me feeling saddened. Who are you calling an old woman? I'm still spry. Just by seeing spry, actually you're a granny, Alice continued brazenly. While I wondered how to respond, we were suddenly interrupted by a familiar voice saying, I'm home. Brad, wait, what happened at work? Alice panicked, clearly worried about being overheard. We went bankrupt, Brad replied listlessly. Bankrupt? The company's gone under. Alice's misunderstanding echoed through the room, followed by stunned silence. It wasn't just Alice who was surprised. My mother-in-law and I were both taken aback. Alice grabbed my son's shoulders and started shaking him. What does bankrupt mean? Jobless, penniless. What are we going to do about the wedding? I'm sorry, it'll have to wait, Brad replied, his voice devoid of energy. Releasing her grip from my son, Alice cried out, then how am I supposed to pay the damages? It wasn't just Alice's words that shocked us. My mother-in-law and I were stunned. My son being jobless was one thing, but I couldn't keep up with everything that was happening. Damages? Ah, never mind. Just give me the gift money quickly, Alice said, no longer caring if my son was present, holding out her hand to me. Alice, could you give us an explanation? My mother-in-law interjected. Shut up. Just give me the money, Alice snapped. It's you who needs to shut up, young lady. Explain yourself. My mother-in-law's tone suddenly turned harsh, catching Alice off guard. Under the watchful gaze of my mother-in-law and me, Alice began to speak in a weak voice. Apparently, Alice had been having an affair with her boss at her part-time job. Moreover, the man was married, and his wife found out, demanding damages. Alice had no money to pay, so she devised a plan to marry my son. She calculated that if they married, she would receive a hefty sum in gift money and planned to have my son pay for all the wedding costs while she kept the gift money for herself. My mother-in-law and I were speechless. We were angry that she had used my son, but we were also astounded by how she didn't think she had done anything wrong throughout the entire conversation. I've already settled things with my boss. Once I pay the damages, it'll be over. That's why I'm going through with the marriage. Give me the gift money. It's fortunate the truth came out before the wedding, but I didn't know what to say to her. As I pondered, I heard a low, muffled voice. Don't make decisions on your own. Looking up, I saw my son Brad glaring at Alice, his face filled with anger. Brad was usually so calm. He had never raised his voice at her before. Alice appeared startled. So what if it's over? You're not even trying to pay the damages yourself. You were planning to use our marriage for your own gain. You haven't shown any remorse. Do you really love me? Of course I love you. That's why I want to get married. Then pay the damages yourself. Show some sincerity. But, Alice tried to hold onto my son, but he coldly pushed her away. Either way, we can't get married until I find a new job. Can you wait until then? Alice was speechless. If she truly loved him, she would have been willing to wait and support him. But those words didn't come from her. That's enough, Brad finally said in frustration. I never even liked you to begin with. I thought you could bring in some money, but I don't need a jobless, penniless man." At last, Alice revealed her true feelings. Perhaps that was what she had been thinking all along. With those words, she shouted and stormed out of the house. I wondered if Brad was truly okay with this. I noticed him shaking. When I turned around, ready to comfort him, I noticed something unexpected. Laughter. My son burst out laughing suddenly. Had the shock broken him? It was a lie. Huh? A lie? The company's not bankrupt. Business is doing well. I just came back to pick up something I forgot. It turned out the bankruptcy was a ruse. My son had returned during his lunch break to retrieve something he'd left behind. Spotting us together and hearing our conversation, he grew suspicious of Alice's insistence on money and set a trap for her. I'd heard that a person's true nature shows when they face joblessness and financial trouble. I wanted to test it. The result was enlightening, to say the least. "Do you still love her?" I asked cautiously. My son looked a bit melancholy. "I loved her enough to want to marry her, but sometimes love fades in an instant. Maybe I didn't love Alice as deeply as I thought. Perhaps calling off the engagement was for the best." I exchanged a knowing glance with my mother-in-law, and we both found ourselves laughing at the situation. As for what happened next, we later learned that the cafe where Alice worked part-time had closed down. Apparently, the manager, who was Alice's affair partner, had to sell the cafe due to a messy divorce and hefty alimony payments. This information came from another regular customer at the cafe. According to Brad, Alice had no means to pay the alimony herself and had to rely on her parents. They were furious with her and ultimately kicked her out of the house. She ended up living in a rundown apartment and took up a night job. Years later, when my two younger sons had started their careers, Brad was preparing for his marriage. His partner was a kind-hearted woman. "Thank you for raising Brad into a wonderful man. I'm not much, but I'm looking forward to getting to know you both better," she told us, even knowing the truth. Moved to tears by her gratitude, both my husband and I were deeply touched. Seeing us emotional, Brad smiled broadly. "Congratulations, Brad. I'm sure your parents in heaven are also happy," I said to him. "Yes, but I'm happiest when my parents here with me are happy," Brad replied softly. His words brought tears to my eyes once more. "Oh dear, here come the tears again. You're crying too much. You've aged and gotten so tearful," my husband teased. I turned to him and declared, "Well, no beer for you tonight then."
Life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. That's how I met Marco. My name's Cora, and I was 28, working as a fitness trainer at a local gym, living a life as structured and disciplined as my fitness routines. That's until Marco walked in one day, looking for a quick workout, and ended up changing my whole life's course. "Hey, I'm Marco," he said, flashing a smile that could light up the darkest of rooms. "Heard this is the best place to get in shape. Mind showing me the ropes?" I raised an eyebrow, sizing him up. He didn't look like the usual gym type, more like he spent his days charming his way through life. "Sure, Marco. Follow my lead, and you'll be in shape in no time. But I warn you, I don't go easy on anyone." Marco chuckled, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Wouldn't have it any other way. Lead on, Cora." Training Marco was like trying to tame a wild stallion. He had energy for days and a stubborn streak to match. But beneath the jokes and easy banter, there was a genuine respect, a connection that neither of us could deny. The days turned into weeks, and our sessions at the gym became the highlight of my days. It wasn't just about the workouts anymore, it was the laughter, the stories, the shared moments in between the sweat and hard work. One evening, as we were wrapping up, Marco turned to me, a serious look replacing his usual grin. "Cora, I've got to tell you something. I'm not just here for the workouts. I'm here for you. You've got this fire, this strength that I've never seen in anyone else. And I'm crazy about you." I was taken aback. This was Marco, the guy who joked about everything, now standing in front of me, bare and honest. "Marco, I don't know what to say. You're not what I expected. But I can't deny it, there's something between us. Something real." That was the start of our whirlwind romance. It was intense, passionate, like a storm that sweeps everything in its path. And before I knew it, I was saying I do to the man who had walked into my gym and turned my world upside down. But the fairy tale didn't last long. After the wedding, Marco dropped a bombshell that would set the stage for the battles to come. Cora, we need to move into my mother's house. I've got strong family ties, and it's important for me to be there for them. I felt my stomach drop. Maria, his mother, was a force to be reckoned with, her sharp tongue and critical eye a stark contrast to Marco's warmth. And then there was Sophia, his sister, a mirror image of her mother's arrogance and disdain. Marco, are you sure about this? Your mother and Sophia, our relationship is strained, to put it mildly. Is this really the best idea? I asked, trying to keep the worry out of my voice. Marco took my hands in his gaze earnest. Cora, I know it's not ideal. But family is everything to me. We'll make it work, I promise. You, me, and our little family against the world. Moving into Marco's family home felt like stepping onto a battlefield every day. Maria's house was a fortress, her rules, her way, or the highway. And Sophia, she was like her shadow, echoing her mother's every frown and snide remark. Morning, Cora, Maria would say, her voice dripping with something that was anything but warmth. Don't forget the dishes need doing, and the living room needs a good dusting. We run a tight ship here. I'd nod, biting back the retort that threatened to spill. Of course, Maria. I wouldn't want the house anything less than perfect. Sophia would smirk from her perch at the kitchen table, her eyes scanning me like I was some bug under a microscope. Yeah, Cora. And try to keep up, will ya? We don't need any dead weight around here. The days were long, the work unending. It was like living in a loop, each day a repeat of the last. Cleaning, cooking, trying to find my footing in a house that felt more like a minefield. Marco was there, but not really. His restaurant was his world, and I was just a ghost in his family home. But then, life decided to throw me a curveball. I was pregnant. The news should have been a beacon of joy, but in Maria's house, it was just another ripple in already troubled waters. Pregnant, huh? Maria's voice was flat, her eyes hard. Well, don't expect any special treatment. This house doesn't run itself, you know. I held my ground, my hand instinctively resting on my belly. I don't expect special treatment, Maria. But I do expect some understanding. I'm carrying a child, your grandchild. That shut her up, if only for a moment. But it didn't last. The chores piled up, the glares grew sharper, and the house felt smaller with each passing day. Sophia was no help. She watched me struggle, a satisfied smirk never far from her lips. You're slowing down, Cora, she'd taunt. Can't handle a bit of housework? What kind of mother are you gonna be? I wanted to scream, to lash out. But I held it in. For Marco, for the tiny heartbeat that was growing stronger each day. The tension was a constant companion, an uninvited guest at every meal, every moment. Marco, he tried, in his way. But his family, his restaurant, they pulled him in 1,000 different directions, and I was just one more voice in the cacophony of his life. Marco, talk to them, please. I pleaded one night, the weight of the day heavy on my shoulders. Your mother, Sophia, they treat me like I'm nothing, like I don't belong. Marco sighed, a tired sound that spoke volumes. Cora, they're just set in their ways. It's how they've always been. Just give it time, it'll get better. But it didn't get better. It got harder, the house more suffocating, Maria and Sophia more relentless. And me, I was just trying to keep my head above water, to protect the tiny life that depended on me. As I lay in bed each night, the moon casting shadows across the room, I made a silent vow. I wouldn't let them break me. I wouldn't let their words, their disdain, define me. I was stronger than they knew, and one day, they'd see. One day, this house, this battlefield, it would be mine to conquer. Becoming a mother was supposed to be the most beautiful chapter of my life. But in Maria's house, it felt more like a trial by fire. Luca was my little bundle of joy, my ray of sunshine in the storm. Yet, every cry, every smile, was overshadowed by the relentless pressure and criticism from Maria and Sofia. "Really, Cora, can't you keep that child quiet?" Maria would snap, her words sharp as knives, every time Luca so much as whimpered. I held Luca closer, whispering words of comfort, shielding him from the harshness of his own grandmother's words. "He's just a baby, Maria. Babies cry. That's how they communicate." Sofia would roll her eyes, her voice dripping with disdain. "Oh, please. You're just not doing it right, Cora. Maybe if you paid more attention to him instead of feeling sorry for yourself, he'd be quieter." Their words stung, each one a reminder of how out of place I felt in this house, in this family. But it wasn't just the words. It was the way they looked at me, the way they scrutinized my every move, especially after my body had changed from the pregnancy. The weight I'd gained became their favorite topic, a source of endless ridicule. "Looks like those fitness trainer days are long gone, huh, Cora?" Maria would chuckle, eyeing my figure with a smirk. "Better lay off the sweets if you want to fit into your old clothes again." I clenched my fists, forcing a smile to hide the hurt. "I'm proud of my body, Maria. It brought Luca into this world. The weight? It's temporary. But the love I have for my son, that's forever." But my words, my defiance, it didn't matter to them. I was the outsider, the intruder in their perfect little world. And no matter how hard I tried, it never seemed to be enough. Enough was enough. The constant belittling from Maria and Sofia wasn't just chipping away at my spirit, it was igniting a fire within me. A fire to reclaim my life, my body, and my self-respect. I decided to take my journey into my own hands, right there in the four walls of that suffocating house. I started simple, turning a corner of my room into my personal gym. It wasn't much, just a mat, some weights, and a determination as strong as steel. "This is it, Luca," I whispered to my little boy, cradling him in one arm while setting up my phone to record. "Mommy's turning it all around, starting now." The first few days were tough, the exercises leaving me breathless, my muscles screaming. But each drop of sweat, each aching limb, felt like a triumph. "Think you can just bounce back, Cora?" Maria sneered one day, watching me pant through my routine. "It's not that easy, you know. Takes more than a few stretches to fix what's broken." I wiped my brow, fixing her with a steely gaze. "Watch me, Maria. I'm not just fixing what's broken. I'm building something stronger. And I don't need your approval or your snide comments." That's when I decided to go public with my journey. I started a YouTube channel and an Instagram page, sharing every struggle, every victory. It was raw, it was real, and to my surprise, it resonated with so many out there. "Mom, look at this," I'd say to Luca, showing him the screen filled with comments and likes. "We're not alone. There are so many rooting for us." And then came the advertisers, their offers turning my little corner of the internet into a thriving source of income. I was stunned, overwhelmed, but above all, I was empowered. "Can you believe this, Luca?" I'd whisper, tucking him into bed. "We're doing it. We're really doing it." But with every success, the tension in the house grew thicker. Maria and Sofia couldn't stand it, the way I'd turned their ridicule into my armor, their disdain into my driving force. "What's this now, Cora? Playing the star while the rest of us do the real work?" Sofia spat one day, her eyes venomous. I stood my ground, Luca on my hip, my heart stronger than ever. "It's called turning the tide, Sofia. It's called taking back control. And if that bothers you, well, that's your problem, not mine." The house that once felt like a prison was now just a backdrop. My world was larger, brighter, filled with the love of my son and the support of a community that saw me, the real me. The success of my online channels was a sweet victory, but it brought a new kind of challenge. Marco was stunned by the numbers, the comments, the sheer scale of it. But his pride was bruised. He didn't want the world, especially his family, to see the shift in our roles. Cora, it's incredible. But you know how my mother and Sophia are. Please, let's keep this between us. I don't want them thinking I'm not the provider, he pleaded one evening, his eyes begging for understanding. I sighed, the weight of his request heavy on my shoulders. Marco, I'm proud of what I've achieved. It's not just about the money, it's about respect, about independence. He nodded, his hand reaching for mine. I know, and I respect that. But in this house, it's complicated. Let's just keep it our little secret, for now. I agreed, reluctantly, and began transferring $4,000 a month to Marco's account. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Maria and Sophia continued their tirade, oblivious to the truth. They saw me as a leech, living off their precious son and brother. You're just a freeloader, Cora. Always taking, never contributing, Maria would snarl, her words sharp as ever. I bit back my retort, the secret of my success a silent shield against her barbs. I contribute in my own way, Maria. Not that you'd ever acknowledge it. Sophia was no better. What do you even do all day, Cora? Lounge around while we do all the real work? Their ignorance was a bitter pill, but I swallowed it. My focus was Luca, my channels, my newfound strength. I'd walk with my son in the park, my camera a constant companion, capturing the moments, the workouts, the real me that they refused to see. Cora, you're wasting your time with those videos, Maria would scoff, watching me edit my latest post. But the numbers told a different story. The subscribers, the views, the comments, they were real, tangible. They were mine. Maybe to you, Maria. But to me, and to thousands out there, it's anything but a waste, I'd reply, my confidence unshaken. Marco's restaurant troubles added another layer to our already complicated life. He came to me one day, his pride barely holding back his desperation. Cora, the restaurant, it's struggling. I need help. Would you lend me some money? Just to tide things over? His vulnerability was a rare sight, and it tugged at my heartstrings. Of course, Marco. I'll help. But this isn't just a loan, it's an investment. In us, in our family. His relief was palpable, but it was tinged with the unspoken truth. I was the lifeline, the silent savior of the family facade. And as I transferred $10,000, as I watched the gratitude and the guilt in his eyes, I knew the balance had shifted. Time in that house felt like a ticking bomb, and each day brought us closer to the explosion. Sophia's marriage brought her husband, Rick, into an already cramped space. His presence only added to the chaos and tension that had become a constant in the house. You two just take up space, Maria would sneer, her words cutting through the crowded living room. You're nothing but freeloaders, Cora. You and that kid. I clenched my teeth, hugging Luca closer. We're family, Maria. Or at least, that's what a house like this is supposed to mean. But when Sophia announced her pregnancy, Maria's attitude shifted into something even harsher, more direct. This house is getting crowded, Cora. And frankly, you and your boy are just in the way. The words stung, but before I could muster a response, Marco dropped a bombshell of his own at dinner. I have to go out of town for a few weeks. Restaurant business, he said, avoiding my gaze. A few weeks in this madhouse without even the slightest buffer Marco provided felt like a sentence I couldn't bear. You're leaving? Now? With everything going on? I asked, my voice barely a whisper over the lump in my throat. He didn't meet my eyes. I have to, Cora. It's important. And just like that, he was gone. The door shut behind him, and the weight of his absence settled over the house like a thick fog. I tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy for Luca. We went for our walks, did our workouts in the park, anything to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the house. But when we returned from kindergarten one day, the sight that greeted us froze me in my tracks. Our belongings, bags, suitcases, Luca's toys, were piled up outside the front door like garbage. "Mommy, what's happening?" Luca's small voice was laced with confusion and fear. I swallowed hard, fighting back the tears as I approached the door. "Maria, Sophia, what is this? Why are our things outside?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger and disbelief. The response came cold and merciless from the other side of the door. "You heard me, Cora. The house is too crowded, and you two are just taking up space. It's time for you to leave. Find somewhere else to call home." Maria's voice was like a knife, and Sophia's echoing laughter only twisted it deeper. I stood there, my whole world collapsing around me. And what should I tell Marco? What will you say to your son when he asks where his wife and child are? Their laughter was the only answer I got. It was clear, in their eyes, we were expendable, an inconvenience easily discarded. With a heavy heart and a mind swirling with shock and betrayal, I gathered our belongings. Holding Luca's hand tightly, I stepped away from the house that was never a home. The pain was sharp, the betrayal bitter, but it was the clarity of the moment that struck me the most. This was the end of one chapter, a chapter of struggle and pain. But it was also the beginning of something new, something ours. I rented an apartment, a small but safe haven for me and Luca. As I unpacked our lives, the reality of what had happened, of what I had escaped, began to sink in. I was alone, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope, a sense of freedom. Settling into the new apartment was a bittersweet experience. It was a safe haven for me and Luca, a place where the shadows of Maria's house couldn't reach us. I was meticulously arranging our belongings, trying to make the space feel like home, when my phone buzzed with a message that sent shockwaves through my world. It was from Sophia, her message laced with a sickening glee. "You think you know Marco? Think again, Cora." Attached was a link, a portal to a truth I had never imagined. Trembling, I clicked the link. The screen lit up with images that shattered my reality. There was Marco, not buried in restaurant woes, but in the arms of another woman. Their intimacy was undeniable, the photos a stark contrast to the lies he'd fed me. The most recent ones were dated just yesterday. The business trip, the stress he'd mentioned, it was all a facade, a cruel play where I was the unwitting financier. I felt numb, the pain and betrayal intertwining into a cold resolve. For years, I had been the backbone, the silent benefactor of a man who lived a double life, all while his family treated me like dirt. A week of turbulent emotions was broken by incessant calls from Marco. His voice, once a comfort, was now a trigger for my contempt. "Cora, please, you need to come back. Mom and Sophia crossed a line. And the restaurant, it's in shambles. I need you, Cora. The bills, they're piling up." The pleas that would have once pulled at my heartstrings, now evoked nothing but disdain. "So you only need me to pay your bills and your family's bills?" His voice cracked, desperation seeping through. "We're still a family. You, me, Luca. Isn't that worth fighting for?" A bitter laugh escaped me. "A family? Is that what you call this charade?" "No, Marco. We're far from a family. And as for your restaurant, your debts? They're yours to deal with." Silence filled the line, heavy and uncomfortable. I could almost feel the weight of his predicament pressing down on him. "But Cora, the money, Your problem, Marco. Your restaurant, your money. I'm done being your lifeline." I cut in, my voice unwavering, strong. "However, we will discuss all this tomorrow. I will come to your mother's house." I made my decision. I'd return to that house, not as the broken woman they expected, but as the force they never saw coming. I'd face them, face Marco, Maria, and Sophia, armed with the truth and a plan that would turn their world upside down. Stepping into the house was like entering a lion's den. Marco's face lit up with a mix of hope and surprise, but Maria and Sophia's expressions were as cold as ice. They clearly weren't thrilled about my return. "Look who's back," Maria said, her tone dripping with disdain. Missed us, have you? I met her gaze, without flinching. Not at all, Maria. I'm here for something important. I handed Marco the envelope, his face turning pale as he recognized it for what it was. Divorce papers, Marco, I stated, the words tasting of freedom. Our marriage ends here. Maria and Sophia's initial shock quickly morphed into smiles. Finally getting rid of the dead weight, Marco? Sophia jeered, her laughter grating on my nerves. But their joy was premature. Don't get too excited, I interjected sharply. You might want to sit down for this. It's been me, not Marco, keeping this household afloat. The room fell into stunned silence. Marco's eyes darted between me and his family, the truth finally out in the open. It's true, he admitted, his voice barely audible. The restaurant's been failing. Cora's been covering everything. She transferred $4,000 to me every month. Maria and Sophia turned on him, their faces twisted with anger and disbelief. You lied to us? You let her pay our bills? Maria's voice was shrill. What should we do now, without her money? Then, Marco continued, his desperation clear. I'm going to file for alimony. I earn less, so it's only fair. His mother and sister were delighted with this decision and even clapped their hands. Their claps echoed hollowly in the room, but I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity. You think that's going to work, Marco? You won't get a cent from me. Especially not after I found out about your affair. The color drained from his face. How did you? He stammered, his false bravado crumbling. I pointedly looked at Sophia. Your sister was kind enough to send me all the proof I needed. The argument that erupted was fierce, the house filled with accusations and betrayals laid bare. Marco and Sophia were shouting at each other, waving their arms. Amid the chaos, I remained calm, my next move clear. I'm taking back what's mine, I declared, my voice cutting through the noise. Every appliance, every piece of furniture I paid for. You're left with what you've earned, which is nothing. And that's exactly what I did. I stripped the house of every trace of my financial support, leaving them to face the consequences of their actions. Maria's and Sophia's pleas for mercy, for forgiveness, were ignored. I blocked their numbers, severing the last ties to a life of deceit and disrespect. The fallout was swift. Marco's restaurant crumbled under the weight of debt, the house was lost, and Sophia's husband walked away from the wreckage of their family. They were left with nothing but each other and their mistakes in a cramped rented apartment. As for me, Luca and I flourished in our new life. Our days were filled with love, laughter, and the peace we'd fought so hard to find. The past was behind us, a distant memory overshadowed by the bright future we were building together. We were more than survivors, we were conquerors, and our story was just beginning. My name is Polly. I was sitting at the top of the stairs, just out of sight. I could hear them in the kitchen, their voices all tangled up like a bunch of knotted shoelaces. Mom and Frank, the guy who swooped into our lives like some kind of low-rent Superman, minus the cape and all the good stuff. Frank, she's my daughter, I heard Mom say, a tremble sneaking into her voice like it was trying to tiptoe around him. Look, Sheila, I didn't sign up for this, you know? It's bad enough I gotta deal with this place being a mess and you're cooking. He grumbled so loudly, I could hear his words clear as day. Now I got my own kid on the way, and I need to think about that, not this. Say it, Mom dared him, quieter now. Say what you mean, Frank. He snorted. Not this leech you got hanging on us. What is she, huh? Just a mouth to feed. Someone I got no bond with. She's just gotta go. Mom exhaled long and sorrowful, like the air itself was heavy with regret. But where would she go? I felt like my heart was a punching bag, and Frank was the kind of guy who didn't know when to stop swinging. What about her aunt? That sister of what's his name, the dead guy? Linda? But... No buts, Sheila. Geez, you're always so soft. She's family, ain't she? Let her deal with the kid. There was a quiet beep as someone pressed a number on the phone, and my ears strained to hear the rest. "Yeah, hi Linda? Frank here. Yeah, you're about to do me a solid. Got a bit of a situation." "Well, no, not a health thing. It's about the kid, Sheila's daughter." I squeezed my eyes shut, wishing I could just disappear into the worn carpet beneath me. "Yes, Polly," Frank's voice was gruff, impatient. "Look, here's the deal. She's coming to live with you." "What?" "Nah, don't worry about it. She's practically invisible anyway. Won't even know she's there." I heard Mom's shuffling feet, like she was pacing or fidgeting, probably wringing her hands the way she did when she was torn up about something. "Linda, it's Sheila." "Yes, I know. We're in a tight spot. I can't, with the baby coming." The next voice, Aunt Linda's, cut through the line, sharp and cold like the knives she used to make her overcooked roasts. "Fine. I'll take her. But I'm not running a charity here, Sheila. You better keep sending checks." I could almost see Mom wincing, even from where I sat. It stung, knowing the rest of my things in that duffel bag weren't half as important as those checks to Aunt Linda. Footsteps hammered towards the stairs, and I scampered up and into my room, heartbeat thundering so hard in my chest it nearly drowned out the sounds of the looming goodbye. Mom knocked softly, as if the force of her own hand could shatter me. "Honey," she started, pushing the door open, her face all twisted in a way that let you know that "I'm sorry" was coming before a word left her lips. "You're gonna stay with Aunt Linda for a bit." I stood there, my arms tight around that duffel bag, like it was the only thing I had left in the whole sorry world. Because, maybe, it was. With a glance back at the room that had been mine, I stepped out into the dim hallway, Mom trailing behind me like a shadow I wished I could shake. I didn't even turn to look at her as I walked out the front door. It was easier that way. Standing on the porch, Aunt Linda looked me up and down as I clutched my duffel bag, each second stretching out like hours. "So you're here, Polly," she finally spoke, the words flat and hard. "Hi, Aunt Linda," I managed to mutter, trying to keep my voice steady. "Don't just stand there, bring your stuff in. But remember, I run a tight ship. You'll follow my rules under my roof," she said, turning on her heel and heading inside. I followed her into the house, which had the warmth of an ice cube. Rule 1, no shoes in the house. Park 'em by the door. And don't you dare drag in any dirt. I keep a clean home. I nodded, slipping off my sneakers and leaving them neatly by the entrance. Rule 2, lights out by 9 on school nights. I won't have any late night gallivanting or nonsense, she continued, ticking off her rules on her fingers as she went. "Okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Rule 3, don't talk back. Don't question me. Just do as you're told, quick and without fuss. Her house was like a museum, everything in its place and nothing out of line. The living room looked barely lived in. Plastic covers clung to the sofas, and I'd bet my last dollar they'd never been sat on. Aunt Linda caught my gaze and snapped, "Those are for protection, not for sitting. God help you if I catch a crease in them." I just nodded again, trying to take it all in. A few days in and it felt like I was walking on eggshells that were rigged to explode. I spent my time trying to be invisible, hoping that'd save me from her sharp tongue. One day, I slipped up, I spilled a bit of milk on the counter. Quick as I could, I wiped it up, but not quick enough. "What's this, a puddle?" Aunt Linda had appeared like a whisper, and her voice was like thunder. "Wasting food and making a mess." "I got it, Aunt Linda. It's clean now." I showed her the rag, trying to prove it was just a small spill. "You think sorry and a rag fixes everything? You think I have the time and money to waste on your clumsiness?" "No, I started," but she cut me off with a wave of her hand. Like I needed more problems. "Your mom sends you here like I got nothing better to do," she grumbled. "Even your own mom didn't want you, so why should I?" Her words hit me square in the chest. I stood there, jaw tight, swallowing the hurt because crying wouldn't change a thing. I knew arguing would only make it worse. The rules were clear, and Aunt Linda was the kind who never bent them. Not for anyone. "Sorry, won't happen again," was all I could get out. "You're right, it won't. Because if something like this happens again, we're gonna have a bigger problem, you hear me?" Loud and clear, I answered. My voice sounded small, even to my own ears. Dinner was a silent affair. Aunt Linda liked eating without the sound of anyone else's breathing, it seemed. I tried to chew quietly, making every move deliberate, wishing I could just disappear into my room already. Days bled into weeks and weeks into months, each as unremarkable as the last, until one afternoon. I was sitting on the carpet in my room, the one with the faded wallpaper peeling at the corners. My room at Aunt Linda's was just another box in the stack, nothing like my old one back at Mom's. With Aunt Linda at the grocery store, I grabbed the cordless phone from its cradle in the living room. My heart was racing as I punched in Mom's number, a sequence I still knew by heart. Years of dialing it for takeout or when there was a spider too big for me to handle alone. The phone rang and rang. On the fourth, she picked up. "Yeah? Mom, it's me, Polly," I blurted out before my courage could fail. There was a pause, a breath, a sigh. "What do you want?" I miss you, Don't." She cut in, her voice icy. "Don't ever call here again." The line clicked dead. I stood there, phone in hand, her words a new weight in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't just the rejection that stung, it was the finality of it. "I hope that was important." Aunt Linda's voice came from behind me like a winter's draft. I turned, startled, the phone slipping slightly from my grasp. "I just wanted to talk to her," I said, my voice failing to hide the quiver. She snatched the phone from my hand, her eyes narrow slits. "You think these calls are free?" I'm sorry, I'll pay for it," I stammered, though I had no idea how. Aunt Linda snorted. "Pay for it? With what? No, you've caused enough trouble. I'm done with it, done with you." Before I could plead, she was on the phone, barking into the receiver. "Yeah, Betty? Get a room ready. She's coming to you." I barely had time to process her words before I found myself holding a bus ticket and a hastily repacked duffel bag. She dumped me at the bus stop with a shake of her head and a good riddance that followed me onto the bus. I was on my way to Grandma's, and as the bus chugged along, the town I knew became a blur. I thought about Mom's voice, that tone I'd never heard before. I pressed my forehead against the cool window, the hum of the engine a stark contrast to the storm inside me. Grandma lived in a smaller town a couple of hours away, in a house that was as old but twice as cozy as Aunt Linda's. She was standing on the porch when I arrived, her eyebrows drawn down in concern. "You okay, Polly?" she asked as I trudged up the steps. I shook my head. "Aunt Linda sent me away. Mom doesn't want to talk to me anymore." Grandma sighed, opening her arms wide. I stepped into her hug like it was a safe haven. "Families can be tough," she murmured. "Come on in, I'll make you some tea." As I sank down at her kitchen table, surrounded by the comforting scent of cinnamon and apples, the warmth of the room unfreezing my fingers, I started to realize something hard. That sometimes, the idea of a parent isn't what you get. And maybe, just maybe, I had to start figuring out how to deal with that. The day I settled into Grandma's house, I could tell it was a different world. The walls were lined with pictures of plants and landscapes, unlike the museums back at Aunt Linda's place. Grandma was already in the kitchen, the heart of her home, humming a tune I didn't recognize. "Gran, you need help with anything?" I called out as I dragged my bag inside. Without missing a beat in her humming, she replied, "Nah, just park yourself at the table. Gonna fix us some grub." Her voice was raspy from years of yelling over the noise of farm machinery back when she used to run the family's apple orchard. Now, the most noise she dealt with was the creaking of the porch swing and the clatter of her old pots and pans. As the weeks passed, I fell into step with her ways. Wake up before the sun, help with breakfast, then off to school. After school, help around the house, dinner, homework, and bed. No frills, no drama. One chilly afternoon, Grandma found me on the porch swing, the horizon painted orange and pink by the setting sun. "Got something to tell ya," she said, pulling the other side of the swing down with her weight. I tightened my grip on the chains of the swing. Whatever it was, Grandma wasn't one for beating around the bush. "You're not just staying here, you know. This isn't temporary." She held out some papers to me. "I've gone and made it official. You're mine now, for good." I scanned the papers. Words like custody and guardianship jumped out at me. She'd done it. "Why'd you do this, Gran?" To me, it seemed like taking on a burden more trouble than a teenage girl was worth. "'Cause your blood, kid. More than that. You got spirit. Remember, tenderness beneath the strength." She repeated her old saying and tapped her chest. "Right here is where you've gotta be toughest." We sat quiet for a while, the swing creaking under us, the sky darkening. I let her words wrap around me like the quilts on my new bed upstairs. "Thanks, Gran," I finally said. That was all. Thanks. It sounded lame even to my own ears. "Well, don't thank me yet. You'll be pulling extra weeds tomorrow, make no mistake." Her tone was playful, but I knew she'd hold me to it. Sitting on the swing now, a few days after my sweet 16, I could see that Grandma's house wasn't just a haven. It was a starting line. And with her backing, I was finally ready to run my race. The morning sun hadn't even cracked the sky when Grandma kicked the bottom of my bed. "Rise and shine, Doc," she barked, same as she had every morning since I started med school. I groaned, my hand searching for the alarm clock. "It's not even light out, Gran." World don't wait for light. Cows don't milk themselves. Patients don't cure themselves, neither. She didn't have cows to milk, of course. It was about getting a point across, like always. Afternoons at the hospital were a blur of white walls and beeping monitors. By the time I got back, evening had settled in, and the house glowed with warm light. "How'd it go?" Grandma was at the stove, poking at something that smelled like heaven. "Good, real good." I washed my hands at the kitchen sink, watching her move around the kitchen. "Dr. Klein let me lead a minor procedure." She raised her eyebrows, a spoon still in her hand dripping some sauce. "Is that right? And how'd that feel?" "Scary as hell," I admitted. "But I did it, and it went well." "That's 'cause you're made of tough stuff." She plated the food and set it on the small kitchen table. "Earned your stripes today, huh?" "Feels like it," I agreed, diving into dinner. Afterward, we sat on the porch, me with a textbook, her with her knitting. The night was quiet, the only sound the crickets and the occasional turn of a page or click of needles. "Thinkin' of Ted?" she asked out of the blue. Ted was the first boy I brought home, a lifetime ago it seemed. Not much time for that. I didn't even glance up from my book. Relationships took time and energy I didn't have. "You make time for what's important," she countered. "There's more to life than just work and study." I sighed. "Maybe after my residency, Gran." She nodded, knowing that was the best I could offer right then. "Just remember, life's short." I smiled at her words, thinking how many times I'd heard just that. "Never forget, you got more to give than just being a good doctor. Got a heart that needs sharing too." It was in this simple way that she kept my feet on the ground, reminding me there was a world outside medicine, and one day, I'd be a part of that too. We didn't talk much after that. The night wrapped around us, a blanket of peace as I pondered a future that seemed both exciting and terrifying. As the clock ticked towards tomorrow, I knew one thing for sure, whatever the future held, I'd face it head on. Just like Grandma taught me. I should have known when Gran missed breakfast for the third day straight. "It's nothing," she'd said, waving off my concern. But nothing didn't leave you pale and worn out, nothing didn't whisper lies in a voice that trembled like an old barn in a storm. The news hit like a brick. "It's cancer," the doctor told me, voice flat like the EKG I wished was for someone else, anyone else. "You serious?" I'd asked, eyes darting from the doctor to Gran, who sat there nodding like she'd known all along. As serious as it gets, Gran said. She sat up straight, no tears, just that squared chin that always meant business. The battle was short and fierce, and through it all, she'd never let me see her scared. Until one quiet morning when she finally let go of the fight, the breath slipping from her in a soft sigh, like she was slipping into a warm bath. After, the house felt empty, like someone had scooped out the middle and left me with a shell. I walked through the funeral like someone else, shaking hands, accepting hugs, hearing murmurs of "she loved you like her own." They didn't get it, not really. It wasn't like she was my own, she was my everything. After everyone had gone, I stayed back, leaning on the cool marble, staring at the casket that was too new, too shiny. Left alone, I whispered to Gran, like I used to when it was just me and her against the world. "I'll make you proud, I swear." The next morning, I found myself at the hospital, the hall sterile and smelling of disinfectant. My hands were steady, my mind clear. This was where I belonged. I might have lost Gran, but I was going to save others, keep going, just like she would have wanted. In surgery, my hands didn't shake. Gran's strength lived in me. Each stitch was a promise, a testament to her legacy, a legacy of love. Love that didn't end with last breaths or in silent funeral halls. It was the love that pushed you forward when life kicked you in the teeth. The love that made you square your shoulders and face each day knowing you were never really alone. Mom always had a flair for drama, like she could smell money from miles away and come sprinting. The doorbell rang one lazy Sunday, pulling me away from medical journals and a cup of coffee. I opened the door and there they were, like some twisted version of a family reunion photo. Mom looked at me with those hawkish eyes, and before I could even get out a hello, she was in with the ask. "You've got to share, it's only fair." "Half is ours by rights," she said, her hand fluttering around like a bird trying to get out of a cage. Stepdad just leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, a muscle ticking in his jaw. He had that look, the one he got when he knew Mom had a great idea. Sarah hung back, not saying a word, just scrolling on her phone. I couldn't help it, a laugh just bubbled up. "Oh, you? For what, exactly? Last time I checked, you kicked me out when I was 11. Mom's eyes narrowed to slits. "We put a roof over your head, fed you, clothed you. That has to be worth something." "Fed? Clothed? More like rations and hand-me-downs." I crossed my arms, mirroring Stepdad. I was not going to be bullied. "But Gran," she said, the word almost a slur, "she left you everything, and we're struggling here." Stepdad took a step forward. "Listen, just give us what we deserve and we can all walk away from this peacefully." I shook my head, a mix of anger and disbelief churning in my gut. "Gran didn't leave you a penny, 'cause she knew exactly what sort of people you are. Matter of fact, you remember that whole thing when I was a kid, about where I came from? Well, turns out Gran adopted me when I was a baby, so legally, I'm not even obligated to give you the time of day, let alone any inheritance." Mom went pale as a sheet, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. "No." Sarah looked up then, her face confused. "What's she saying, Mom?" Stepdad's face transformed into a dark cloud. "She's saying we're not getting a damn thing." "That's right," I affirmed. "You won't get anything from me." "You'll regret this," Stepdad growled, a vein bulging in his neck. I stepped out, bracing myself against the frame of the door, the morning sun hot on my back. "Is that a threat?" I asked, my voice steelier than I felt. He squared his shoulders, but I wasn't 11 and scared anymore. "It's a promise." Mom grabbed his arm, giving me a look that could curdle milk. "Let's go," she hissed. I stepped back inside and closed the door, the click of the latch loud in the quiet house. Gran was gone, but she left me more than money. She left me the courage to stand up to them and the sense of worth they'd tried to take from me. Neighbors gave me the heads up with a quick call, that sort of just thought you should know ring that meant trouble. "Your mom and her lot set up camp in your grandma's old house," they said, all concerned and a bit gossip hungry. That house was mine and mine alone, Grandma made sure of that. The nerve of them, thinking they could just move in and not one soul would tell me. Guys, I said, knocking on the door louder than necessary, you can't just crash here. This isn't a motel. Mom yanked the door open, a fake smile plastered on her face. Polly, we're family, she exclaimed, leaning against the doorframe like she owned the place. Stepdad loomed behind her, his look less welcoming. We're not going anywhere. This is as much ours as it is yours, he stated with that smug smirk that made my blood heat up. I clenched my fists, feeling the weight of the keys in my pocket. The house is mine, legally. You have one day to get out, or I'm calling the cops. They laughed, the kind that grates on your nerves. Yeah, sure. Call the cops on your family. That'll look great, Stepdad jeered, his arms folded across his chest. I didn't want a scene, but they left me no choice. The next morning, they were still there, lounging around as if they owned the place. That's when I made the call. When the cops rolled up, I could almost taste the sour change in the air. I stood by, arms crossed, watching through the living room window. Ma'am, sir, you need to leave the premises. Now, one officer said firmly, his hand resting near his belt. But she's my daughter, Mom tried to plead, her voice shifting to desperation. And I'm her stepdad, added Stepdad, that tick in his jaw back like a storm warning. Doesn't matter. You don't own this house and the owner wants you out, the second cop chimed in, stepping forward. They'd finally stopped laughing. I could see the realization dawning on their faces, the reality that they couldn't bulldoze their way through life anymore. I didn't budge until their car was a speck in the distance, and then turned to face the empty house. It felt like taking a deep breath after being underwater too long. It was quiet, the kind of peace that comes when a storm has passed and left clear skies in its wake. Stepping into the house, the air felt different, lighter. Grandma's voice didn't echo the way it did before, now it was in my own head, words that came like a bomb, soothing over years of scars. With each step, I started to reclaim the space. The kitchen, where Grandma taught me to bake, the living room, where she healed my teenage heartaches with ice cream and tough love, and her bedroom, where she'd say prayers that I'd find my way in a world that could be cruel and unforgiving. I made coffee, the aroma filling the space, binding me to this house, this moment. Sitting at the kitchen table, I raised my cup to the new day. Justice served, and served well. I always felt a flutter of nerves whenever we visited David's family. It wasn't that they weren't welcoming, far from it. David's parents, Martha and George, were the epitome of warmth, and his brother Mike could always be counted on for a good laugh. But then there was Laura, Mike's wife, the proverbial thorn in my side. As David and I drove to his parents' house for the usual Sunday dinner, I couldn't help but voice my concerns. David, are you sure it's okay that I come along today? I don't want to create any tension, especially with Laura around. David glanced at me, his eyes softening. Chloe, your family. They all adore you. As for Laura, just try to ignore her snide remarks, okay? I nodded, trying to brush aside the unease. David parked the car, and we made our way to the front door, greeted by the familiar, comforting aroma of roast beef and homemade apple pie. As we entered, Martha's face lit up. Chloe, David, you're here. Come in, come in. George followed suit, his hearty laugh filling the room as he enveloped us in bear hugs. How's my favorite daughter-in-law and soon-to-be lawyer? Before I could reply, Mike bounded over, his usual playful self. Hey, sis, ready for another round of family madness? I laughed, the tension easing a bit. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Then, from the living room, Laura's voice cut through the air, tinged with her typical mix of indifference and sarcasm. Oh, look, the happy couple finally graces us with their presence. I forced a smile, meeting her gaze. Hi, Laura, good to see you too. Dinner was served, and the conversation flowed easily at first, everyone catching up on the week's events. Laura, however, seemed to be in a particularly prickly mood. So, Chloe, still trying to play house with David? I mean, with your career and all, isn't that a bit too traditional for you? She asked, a smirk playing on her lips. David squeezed my hand under the table, a silent gesture of support. I took a deep breath. Well, Laura, we all make choices that suit us best. I believe in balancing career and family. Laura snorted. Balancing, right. As if having kids doesn't totally derail your life. Mike, trying to diffuse the tension, chimed in with a chuckle. Oh, come on, Laura, a little niece or nephew would be a joy, wouldn't it? Laura rolled her eyes dramatically. Joy? More like a lifetime of hassle. But hey, if Chloe wants to pop out a few kids and live the suburban dream, who am I to judge? I could feel the temperature in the room drop a few degrees. George, ever the peacemaker, attempted to steer the conversation elsewhere. So, David, how's that new project going at work? You were telling me about it last week. David launched into a description of his latest venture, but I could barely focus. Laura's comments had struck a nerve, and I spent the rest of the meal in a daze. It was a cool autumn evening, and the family had gathered at Martha and George's for dinner. This time, the air was filled with an extra buzz of excitement. David and I had a special announcement to make, and I was both nervous and thrilled. As we sat around the dinner table laden with Martha's famous pot roast and mashed potatoes, I exchanged a glance with David. He gave me an encouraging nod. It was now or never. Everyone, we have some news. I began, my voice slightly trembling. All eyes turned to us. Martha leaned forward, her expression expectant. What is it, dear? David took my hand, beaming. We're expecting a baby. There was a moment of stunned silence, then the room erupted in cheers and congratulations. Martha and George were beaming. Oh, my goodness! That's wonderful news. Martha exclaimed, getting up to hug us. George clapped David on the back. Congratulations, son. I'm so proud of you both. Mike hooped, his grin wide. I'm going to be an uncle. That's awesome. Amidst the joy and excitement, Laura sat back, a smirk playing on her lips. A baby, huh? Well, that's going to be a handful. Good luck with that. Her tone was laced with condescension, but I tried not to let it bother me. I was too happy. Martha frowned at Laura's comment. Laura, dear, it's a joyous occasion. Laura shrugged, nonchalantly picking at her food. Sure, joyous. Until the sleepless nights and diaper changes kick in. Mike, sensing the tension, tried to lighten the mood. Oh, Laura, don't be such a pessimist. It's going to be great, right, Chloe? I smiled, determined to keep the atmosphere positive. Absolutely, Mike. We're really excited. The conversation eventually moved on, but Laura's words lingered in my mind. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of apprehension amidst my happiness. As the evening wound down, George raised his glass for a toast. To David and Chloe, and the new addition to our family. Glasses clinked, and everyone echoed, to David and Chloe. These words warmed my heart. Despite Laura's attitude, our joy couldn't be dampened. This was the beginning of a new chapter in our lives, and nothing was going to take that away from us. The excitement of our announcement soon gave way to the harsh realities of pregnancy. My mornings, afternoons, and evenings became a nauseating roller coaster. I could hardly keep anything down, and even the smell of my once favorite foods made my stomach churn. During one of these tough days, David and I were at his parents' for dinner again. I was trying to nibble on some toast, my only safe food these days. David was rubbing my back, trying to comfort me. Chloe, you sure you don't want to try some soup? Mom made it just how you like it, David suggested gently. I shook my head weakly. No, thanks, David. Just the smell is making me queasy. Martha looked at me with concern. Poor dear, this pregnancy seems to be really taking a toll on you." Laura, who had been watching with a disinterested look, chimed in with her usual lack of empathy. "Well, what did you expect, Chloe? Pregnancy isn't a walk in the park. You wanted a baby, so now deal with it." I clenched my jaw, trying to maintain my composure. David's expression hardened. "Laura, that's enough. Can't you see she's struggling?" Laura rolled her eyes. "Oh please, David. I'm just stating the facts. She should have thought about this before." George, trying to defuse the situation, interjected. "Laura, let's keep the dinner pleasant, please." Mike, who had been silent, finally spoke up, his tone a mix of annoyance and concern. "Laura, can't you just lay off for once? Chloe's doing her best." Laura scoffed, pushing her chair back. "I'm just being realistic. You all are just babying her. In my opinion, she's just overreacting. It's just a little morning sickness." I felt a tear slip down my cheek, the stress and hormones getting the better of me. David stood up, his chair scraping back loudly. "That's it. We're leaving. Chloe doesn't need this right now." As David helped me up, Martha came over, her eyes filled with apology. "I'm so sorry, Chloe." "Don't mind Laura, dear." We said our goodbyes quickly, and I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and sadness as we left. The car ride home was quiet, the tension from dinner lingering in the air. As we drove home, I couldn't shake off Laura's words. They echoed in my mind, amplifying my fears and insecurities. But deep down, I knew I had to stay strong, for the sake of our baby. The day finally arrived when David and I welcomed our son, Ethan, into the world. It was a moment of pure joy, overshadowing all the hardships of the past months. We decided to introduce Ethan to the family at Martha and George's place, a neutral ground where everyone could share our happiness. As we entered the house, Ethan cradled in my arms. The family's reactions were everything I hoped for. Martha's eyes lit up, and George's broad smile was like a beacon of warmth. Mike was practically bouncing with excitement. "Oh, my stars, he's just perfect," Martha cooed, gently touching Ethan's tiny hand. George leaned in, his voice gentle. "Welcome to the world, little fella." Mike was next, his voice full of awe. "Hey there, little guy. I'm your Uncle Mike. Ready to cause some trouble together?" Their reactions filled my heart to the brim. But then, there was Laura. She hung back, a sour expression on her face. When she finally approached, her words were like a cold splash of water. "Well, that's a baby, all right. Kinda looks a bit weird, though. All red and wrinkly." The room went silent. Martha's face turned into a frown, and George's eyes narrowed. David's arm instinctively tightened around me. "Excuse me?" Martha said, her tone icy. "What did you just say about my grandson?" Laura shrugged, her voice dripping with disdain. "I'm just saying, he's not exactly cute, is he? Looks kind of scary to me." I felt a sting at her words, and David stepped in, his voice tight. "That's enough, Laura. If you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all." Mike looked at Laura, disbelief written all over his face. "Laura, what's wrong with you? That's your nephew." Laura rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. Everyone's thinking it, I'm just the only one saying it." Martha stepped closer to Laura, her eyes flashing. "Your behavior is disgusting, Laura. If you can't be happy for Chloe and David, maybe you should leave." Laura scoffed, crossing her arms. "Fine. If I'm not welcome, then I'll go. But don't expect me to fawn over a baby like everyone else." With that, she stormed out of the house, leaving a trail of shock and discomfort behind her. The joyous atmosphere had been tainted, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. A few months had passed since Ethan's introduction to the family, and things had been relatively calm. David and I were adjusting to parenthood, albeit with the usual sleepless nights and endless diaper changes. That sense of normalcy was shattered one afternoon when Laura unexpectedly showed up at our doorstep. I opened the door to find her standing there, an odd, frantic look in her eyes. "Laura? What are you doing here?" I asked, surprised. "Chloe, I need a favor, a big one," she blurted out, her voice tinged with desperation. I was wary but curious. "Okay, what is it?" She took a deep breath, her eyes darting around. "I need to borrow Ethan. Just for a little while." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "Borrow Ethan? What on earth for?" She began pacing, speaking rapidly. "It's my grandmother, see? She's old, doesn't have much time left. She told me she's leaving most of her estate to the first grandchild who has a baby. I thought maybe I could pass Ethan off as mine." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You want to pretend my son is yours? Are you insane?" Laura stopped pacing, turning to face me. "It's just for a day, Chloe. My grandmother's not all there anymore. She won't know the difference." Anger bubbled up inside me. "You want to deceive your dying grandmother with my child? That's sick, Laura." She clenched her fists, her voice rising. "You don't understand, Chloe. This could change my life. It's a lot of money we're talking about." I shook my head, disbelief and anger mingling. "I don't care how much money it is. I'm not going to help you lie, especially not with my baby." Laura's face contorted with frustration. "You're being selfish, Chloe. You have no idea what I'm going through." I stood my ground, my voice firm. "And you have no idea what being a mother means." "The answer is no, Laura. Now, I think you should leave." She glared at me, her body tense. "You're going to regret this, Chloe. You just wait and see." With that, Laura stormed off, leaving me standing there, shocked and shaking. I closed the door slowly, my mind racing. The audacity of her request was beyond comprehension. I knew then that Laura was capable of going to extreme lengths for her own benefit, and that realization chilled me to the bone. I called David immediately, recounting the bizarre encounter. He was just as shocked and angry as I was. "She's lost it, Chloe. Just stay away from her, okay? I don't want her anywhere near you or Ethan." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I will. It's too much." After hanging up, I went to check on Ethan, sleeping peacefully in his crib, blissfully unaware of the insanity of the world around him. I promised myself then and there that I would protect him from any harm, no matter what. Laura's bizarre request had opened my eyes to the lengths she would go to, and I knew I had to be vigilant. It was a sunny Tuesday afternoon, and Ethan was taking his nap in his nursery upstairs. I was in the kitchen, trying to catch up on some chores, when the doorbell rang. It was a courier with a delivery of baby supplies I had ordered online. The exchange took less than a minute. But when I returned inside and headed upstairs to check on Ethan, my heart dropped to my stomach. The crib was empty. Ethan was gone. Panic surged through me. "Ethan! Ethan!" I called out, my voice trembling as I frantically searched the room. There was no response, no sign of him anywhere. My mind raced with horrifying possibilities. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking, and dialed David's number. "David, Ethan's gone. He's not in his crib, he's not anywhere." I cried out as soon as he answered. "What? What do you mean gone? Are you sure he's not somewhere in the house?" David's voice was laced with panic. "I've looked everywhere. He's not here, David. Someone took him." I was on the verge of hysteria. David's voice was firm, trying to stay calm for both of us. "Okay, Chloe, call the police right now. I'm leaving the office, I'll be there as soon as I can." I hung up and dialed 911, my voice breaking as I explained the situation to the operator. Within minutes, police cars arrived, their sirens piercing the quiet neighborhood. As the officers began their investigation, David rushed in, his face pale with fear. "Chloe, tell me everything. What happened?" I recounted the events, from the courier's visit to the chilling discovery of Ethan's empty crib. As I spoke, a horrible thought struck me. Laura, she threatened me, after I refused to let her take Ethan. David's face hardened. "I'll kill her if she's done anything to him." The police overheard and immediately took note. "We need to know everything about this Laura. Address, description, everything," one of the officers said. As we provided Laura's details, Martha and George arrived, faces etched with worry. Martha embraced me, her own tears mingling with mine. Just then, Mike burst through the door, his eyes wild with worry. "What's going on?" "I heard Ethan's missing." Before we could answer, his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and his face went white. "It's Laura," he answered, his voice shaking. "Laura, where are you? Do you know anything about Ethan?" The room fell silent, everyone's eyes on Mike. He listened for a moment, his expression turning from worry to shock and then to anger. "You did what? Laura, how could you?" He hung up, his body trembling with rage. "She took him. She's at her grandmother's, trying to pass Ethan off as her own." The police officer sprang into action, coordinating with their team to track Laura down. David held me close, his body rigid with anger and fear. David, Mike, and I were in a state of high alert as we drove to Laura's grandmother's house. The tension in the car was palpable, each of us lost in our own turmoil of anger and worry. As we approached the house, my heart pounded against my chest, a mix of fear and desperate hope. Mike was on his phone, coordinating with the police. "They're on their way. We just need to keep her there until they arrive." We pulled up to the house, and without a second thought, we rushed inside. The scene that greeted us was surreal. Laura was there, holding Ethan in her arms, cooing at him as if he were her own. Her grandmother, a frail, confused-looking woman, was watching them with a faint smile. The moment Laura saw us, her face went white. "What are you doing here?" she stammered, clutching Ethan closer. "Give me my son, Laura," I shouted, my voice filled with a mixture of rage and relief at seeing Ethan. David was right beside me, his eyes fixed on Ethan. "You're done, Laura. The police are on their way." Laura's grandmother looked around, confusion written all over her face. "What's going on? Laura, who are these people?" Before Laura could respond, Mike stepped forward, his voice filled with disgust. "These are Ethan's real parents, Grandma." Laura took him, pretending he was hers. The old woman's eyes widened in shock. "What? Laura, is this true?" Laura's facade finally crumbled. Tears started streaming down her face. "I just wanted the inheritance, Grandma. I didn't think it would go this far." Her grandmother shook her head, disappointment etched on her face. "Laura, how could you? This is unforgivable." By now, Ethan had started to fuss, sensing the tension. I reached out, and Laura, defeated, handed him over to me. Holding Ethan close, feeling his warmth and hearing his familiar sounds, was the most comforting feeling in the world after the terror of the last few hours. "You're sick, Laura," David said, his voice cold. "You need help." Laura was sobbing now, her body shaking. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hurt anyone." Just then, the police arrived, their presence filling the room. They immediately went to Laura, reading her rights as they handcuffed her. As we left Laura's grandmother's house, the police leading Laura away, a wave of relief washed over me. Ethan was safe in my arms, unharmed by the ordeal. In the weeks that followed, our lives were a whirlwind of police statements and court dates. The reality of what Laura had done was sinking in, not just for us, but for the entire family. David and I were sitting in the living room one evening after putting Ethan to bed, the silence between us filled with unspoken thoughts. David finally broke the silence. "Chloe, I can't believe she's actually going to jail for this." I nodded, still processing everything. "I know. It's just, I feel so betrayed, David. She was family." David reached for my hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "She crossed a line, Chloe. What she did was unforgivable. But we need to focus on moving forward, for Ethan's sake." The trial had been swift. Laura's actions were indefensible, and she was sentenced to several years in prison for kidnapping. Mike had filed for divorce, a decision that had shaken him deeply. A few days later, we were at Martha and George's house. The family had gathered, a sense of somber unity in the air. Martha was the first to speak as we all sat in the living room. "I just can't believe she would do something like this. To her own family," she said, her voice heavy with sadness. George nodded, his brow furrowed. "It's a hard pill to swallow. But we have to think about the kids now, about Ethan." Mike sat quietly, his eyes distant. I feel like I didn't know her at all. How could I have been so blind?" David put a hand on his brother's shoulder. "You couldn't have known, Mike. None of us could." The conversation turned to how we could all support each other. It was clear that the family bond had been tested, but not broken. In the months that followed, life slowly returned to a new kind of normal. Ethan was growing fast, his smiles and laughter a constant reminder of the joy he brought into our lives. The ordeal with Laura had left its mark, but it had also made us stronger, more appreciative of the love and support we had for each other. One evening, as I watched Ethan play, I realized that this experience had taught me about the resilience of family, the strength of love, and the power of moving forward, no matter how difficult the past might have been. We had faced our darkest hour, but we had emerged stronger, united by our love for each other and for our son. The future was uncertain, but I knew that as long as we were together, we could face anything.
My name is Claire. At 29, I'm a chef at one of the city's most upscale restaurants. Cooking is my passion, my art. But let me tell you, my life isn't just about perfecting recipes. It's also about dealing with a recipe for disaster, namely, my mother-in-law, Margaret. I met Alex, my husband, in a way most people do these days, online. We clicked instantly. He was charming, with a smile that could light up the darkest room. We married within a year, a small ceremony but filled with love. That's when Margaret entered the picture, and let's just say, she wasn't the typical doting mom. It was a crisp autumn evening when I first met her. Alex had arranged a dinner at our place. I remember being nervous, wanting to impress her. "Mom, this is Claire. She's an amazing chef," Alex had introduced me with pride in his voice. Margaret, a tall woman with sharp features, had looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my apron like it was a piece of alien clothing. "A chef, huh? I hope you can cook something more refined than diner food." I had chuckled, nervously. "I'll do my best to impress you." Dinner was my arena, and I had put my heart into it. The table was set with my best dishes, herb-crusted lamb, a delicate risotto, and a chocolate mousse to die for. Margaret had poked at her food, a frown forming as she tasted each dish. "Well, it's edible, I suppose. Not what we're used to, but it'll do." Alex had shot me an apologetic look, but said nothing. That was Alex, always avoiding confrontation, especially with his mother. After dinner, as I was clearing the table, Margaret cornered me in the kitchen. "Claire, dear, I hope you understand that Alex comes from a refined family. We have certain standards." I had nodded, trying to keep my cool. "I understand, Mrs. Thompson. I'll keep that in mind." She had sniffed, her gaze cold and calculating. "See that you do. My son deserves the best." That night, as Alex and I lay in bed, I turned to him. "Your mother is quite something." He had sighed, pulling me close. "She's always been like that. But don't worry, we'll manage." Manage, I thought. If only I had known then how much of an understatement that would be. It was a busy Friday night at the restaurant. The kind of night where the kitchen is a whirlwind of activity, and I'm in my element, orchestrating the chaos. That's when Margaret decided to grace us with her presence, unannounced. I was plating a delicate salmon dish when I saw her sweeping through the dining area, like she owned the place. She had that look on her face, the kind that spelled trouble. My heart sank. I watched from the kitchen as she settled at a prime table, snapping her fingers for service. I wiped my hands on my apron, bracing myself for the inevitable. Emerging from the kitchen, I approached her table with a cautious smile. "Good evening, Mrs. Thompson." "What a surprise! What can I get for you tonight?" She looked up at me, her eyes sharp. "Oh, Claire, darling. I thought I'd try your little restaurant. Bring me your best dishes. Spare no expense." I nodded, my mind racing. "Of course, Mrs. Thompson." The orders were extravagant: caviar, truffle pasta, the most expensive wine. As I prepared her dishes, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. When the bill arrived at her table, Margaret glanced at it, then waved it away. "Oh, I won't be needing this. Put it on Claire's tab. She's family, after all." My head chef, who had delivered the bill, came back to me with a puzzled look. "Claire, she says you're covering her bill." I felt a knot in my stomach. "Did she now?" I muttered, clenching my fists. I walked back to her table, the bill in hand. "Mrs. Thompson, there seems to be a misunderstanding. This is a business, and..." Margaret cut me off with a wave of her hand. "Nonsense, Claire. You can afford a little generosity for your family. It's the least you can do." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Mrs. Thompson, this is highly irregular. But she was already standing, her coat draped over her arm. "Don't make a scene, dear. It's unbecoming. Just take care of it." And with that, she left, leaving me with a bill that could pay my rent twice over. How could she? How could she just walk in and expect me to foot the bill for her extravagance? I felt used, cornered. And worst of all, I felt alone in this. Alex would just tell me to let it go, to keep the peace. But peace, I realized, came at a price. A price I was no longer sure I was willing to pay. Holidays. A time for family, laughter, and good food. Well, in my world, it meant one thing: cooking up a storm for Margaret's never-ending guest list and dealing with her endless demands. It was Thanksgiving, and as usual, Margaret had decided to host it at our place. "After all, Claire, you have the space, and you're such a good cook," she had said on the phone, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. The day before Thanksgiving, I was in the kitchen, buried under a mountain of groceries that I had paid for, of course. The menu was a laundry list of Margaret's favorites, no regard for what I or anyone else liked. As I was peeling potatoes, Alex walked in, looking sheepish. "Babe, Mom called. She wants to add a few more dishes. Some relatives just RSVP'd." I looked at him, my hands covered in potato skins. "More dishes? Alex, I'm already swamped here." He shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "I know, but you know how she is. It's just a few more people." "Just a few more people," I muttered. It was always just a few more people. The day of Thanksgiving was a blur. I cooked and cooked, the kitchen a battleground. When the guests started arriving, I was still in my apron, a whirlwind of pots and pans. Margaret swept into the kitchen, her nose in the air. "Claire, dear, do make sure everything is perfect. We have some very important guests. I forced a smile. Everything's under control, Mrs. Thompson. The dinner was a hit, or so it seemed. I barely had time to sit down, let alone eat. Margaret played the gracious host, basking in the compliments, as if she had slaved over the stove all day. After the guests had left, I was clearing up, my back aching, my feet sore. That's when Margaret decided to give her feedback. Claire, the turkey was a tad dry, and the cranberry sauce too tart. And really, dear, you could have dressed up a bit. You looked like a maid amongst the guests. I clenched my jaw, holding back the retort that was on the tip of my tongue. I'll keep that in mind for next time, Mrs. Thompson. Alex, who had been silent all evening, finally spoke up. Mom, Claire worked hard. It was a great dinner. Margaret sniffed. Hard work is expected, Alexander. No need for praise. Good night. As I watched her leave, I wondered why I was putting up with this. Why I was allowing myself to be treated like a doormat, my efforts dismissed, my feelings ignored. Alex put an arm around me. Don't take it to heart, babe. Let's just go to bed. I nodded, too tired to argue. But inside, a storm was brewing. Something had to change, and soon. I never thought I'd be grateful for getting sick, but when I caught the flu right before Christmas, it felt like a twisted sort of blessing. Maybe now I'd get a break from Margaret's demands. Or so I thought. I was curled up on the couch, buried under blankets, a mountain of used tissues beside me. That's when my phone rang. It was Margaret, of course. Claire, dear, you do remember Christmas is at our place this year. You'll be cooking, won't you? Her voice was as cold as the winter outside. I croaked into the phone, Margaret, I'm really sick. I don't think I can. She cut me off, her tone icy. Sick? Convenient timing, I must say. We're counting on you, Claire. Don't be selfish. Selfish? I couldn't believe my ears. Margaret, I can barely stand up. I'm contagious. There was a pause, then a huff. Fine. We'll manage somehow. Don't expect us to be sympathetic. The call ended, and I was left staring at the phone, a mix of anger and disbelief churning inside me. Later that day, Alex came home, his face tense. Mom called me. She's really upset, Claire. She thinks you're faking it. Faking it? I sat up, the room spinning a bit. Alex, look at me. Do I look like I'm faking? He sat beside me, his expression softening. No, you look terrible. But you know how Mom is. She's stressed about Christmas. Stressed? What about me? Sick, exhausted, and now accused of lying. Alex, I need you to understand. I'm really sick. I can't cook for Christmas. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know. I'll talk to her. Just rest, okay? Rest. Right. As if I could rest with Margaret's words echoing in my head. The next few days were a blur of fever, chills, and restless sleep. Miraculously, I started feeling a bit better just before Christmas. Not great, but no longer on death's door. I told Alex, hoping for some understanding. Instead, he said, that's great, babe. So you can make it to Mom's for Christmas, right? I stared at him, my heart sinking. Alex, I'm still weak. I can't cook for everyone. He looked disappointed, almost hurt. But it's Christmas, Claire. Mom's expecting us. Can't you just make a small effort? Small effort? I was fighting to get out of bed, and he wanted a Christmas feast. No, Alex. I can't. And I won't. My voice was firm, a hint of the frustration I'd been bottling up coming through. He didn't say anything, just nodded and walked away. As Christmas Eve approached, I was still reeling from the flu. There was no way I could cook an entire feast. I decided to take a stand. I won't be able to cook for Christmas, but I'll order dishes from the restaurant, I told Alex, my voice firm. He looked at me, puzzled. What? But Mom's expecting you to cook, like always. I shook my head. I can't, Alex. I'm still weak. She'll have to deal with it. He sighed, a look of resignation on his face. Okay, I'll tell her. Later, when Alex relayed the message to Margaret over the phone, I could hear her shrill voice from across the room. Order food? That's her solution? Fine, but she'd better not expect me to cook. Christmas Eve arrived, and the delivery man from my restaurant showed up with the food. Margaret was there to meet him, signing the delivery papers without so much as a glance. Little did she know what she was actually agreeing to. As we gathered for dinner, I could feel Margaret's eyes burning into me. Too lazy to cook, Claire? Taking the easy way out, I see. Her words stung, but I bit back a retort. Alex was silent, his eyes fixed on his plate. Throughout dinner, Margaret's comments flew fast and furious. Can't even cook a meal for her family. What kind of wife are you, Claire? I clenched my fists under the table, my patience wearing thin. Alex didn't say a word, his silence a heavy presence at the table. After dinner, as I helped clear the table, Margaret cornered me. You've outdone yourself with laziness this year, Claire. Can't even cook a simple Christmas dinner. I turned to her, my voice low but fierce. I was sick, Margaret. I did what I could. She scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. Sick? Looks more like laziness to me. You've just taken the easy way out. I stared at her, my anger boiling over. I'm not your personal chef, Margaret. I'm not here to bend over backward for you. Her eyes widened in shock, and used to being spoken back to. But I was past caring. Alex finally spoke up, his voice weak. Mom, Claire's right. She was sick. But Margaret brushed him off, her gaze still fixed on me. You've made your point, Claire. Don't expect any sympathy from me. As all the guests gathered in the living room, I stood up, the eyes of the guests curiously fixed on me. A sly smile played on my lips, a sense of retribution fueling my courage. Before everyone leaves, I have something to say, I announced, my voice steady, yet loud enough to cut through the post-dinner chatter. Margaret, sitting at the head of the table, raised an eyebrow. What now, Claire? Another one of your excuses? No, Mrs. Thompson. It's about the dinner tonight, I replied, my satisfaction growing. You owe $5,000 for it. A collective gasp filled the room. Margaret's face transitioned from smugness to shock. Excuse me? $5,000? For what? I held up the invoice, detailing every item. For everything, the groceries, chef's labor, delivery. All of it. Her voice escalated, piercing the shocked silence. This is absurd. I will not pay for your incompetence. But you already agreed to, Mrs. Thompson, when you signed for the delivery, I countered, feeling a surge of power. She sputtered in disbelief. I signed for the delivery, not for this outrageous bill. From my folder, I produced the signed delivery papers. Unfortunately, you did. It's all legally binding. Alex, my husband, who had been a silent spectator, finally interjected, his voice laced with unease. Claire, isn't this a bit much? Margaret turned to him, her eyes alight with vindication. See, even your husband knows you're being unreasonable. I faced Alex, my resolve unwavering. It's not unreasonable, Alex. Your mother needs to understand the cost of her demands. Margaret stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. I will not be swindled by you. One of the guests, an elderly aunt, spoke up tentatively. Margaret, dear, if you signed it, it does seem fair to honor it. Margaret shot her a withering look. Fair? This is daylight robbery. Alex tried to calm the waters. Mom, let's discuss this rationally. Maybe there's a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, Margaret shrieked. Claire is exploiting us. I interjected, my patience fraying. Exploiting? I'm asking to be paid for professional services, Mrs. Thompson. The room had fallen into an uncomfortable silence, the tension almost tangible. Margaret's gaze was venomous. This is a declaration of war, Claire. You will pay for this. I met her gaze, my voice steady. I'm standing up for myself, Mrs. Thompson. That's all. As she stormed out of the room, the guests exchanged uneasy glances, whispering among themselves. Alex approached me, his expression a mix of frustration and disbelief. Claire, why did you have to do this? In front of everyone. I looked at him, a sense of finality settling in my heart. Because, Alex, it was time. Time to show that I won't be pushed around anymore. Not even by your mother. The guests began to disperse, the mood somber, the festive spirit lost. I knew this was a turning point, a moment that would define the future of my relationship with Margaret and maybe even with Alex. The morning after the Christmas debacle was a battleground in our kitchen. The air was thick with resentment and unsaid words. Alex had obviously talked to his mother before, broke the silence with a voice sharpened by anger. You humiliated my mother, Claire. In front of everyone. How could you? I slammed my coffee cup down, my patience frayed to its limits. Humiliated her? Alex, she's been walking all over me for years. When will you see that? He glared at me, his words cutting through the air. She's my mother, Claire. She was just being herself. You didn't have to go and make a scene. I stood up, my own anger rising. Being herself? You mean being overbearing, insulting, and downright disrespectful? And you never did a thing to stop her. He scoffed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Oh, so now I'm the bad guy? She's always right, Claire. You just don't understand her. I stared at him in disbelief. Always right? Even when she treats me like dirt? Is that what you really think, Alex? He didn't back down. Yes, I do. She's my mother. She comes first. That was the last straw. I felt something inside me snap. First? What about your wife, Alex? Where do I come in your life? He didn't answer, just gave me a cold, hard look. I took a deep breath, my decision clear in my mind. You know what, Alex? I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I'm filing for divorce. His face went from anger to shock. Divorce? You're going to throw away our marriage over this. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. No, Alex. I'm saving myself. From your mother, and from a husband who won't stand up for his wife. He looked like he wanted to say something, but no words came out. Instead, he just stormed out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there, a mix of anger, relief, and sadness swirling inside me. The rest of the day passed in a tense silence. The chasm between us had grown too wide to bridge. I knew I had made the right decision, but it didn't make it any less painful. Months had passed since I filed for divorce. The world I once knew had crumbled, but from its ashes, I was building something new, something that was mine. I found myself in the kitchen of my apartment, the morning sun casting a warm glow on the walls. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the air, a comforting presence in my newfound solitude. My phone rang, breaking the peaceful silence. It was my best friend, Lisa. Hey, Claire. How are you holding up? Her voice was filled with concern. I took a sip of my coffee, a smile touching my lips. I'm good, Lisa. Really, I am. I feel free. She chuckled. That's great to hear. You sound better. I leaned against the counter. I am better. I'm focusing on myself now, my career. I'm rediscovering who I am, without Alex, without Margaret. There was a pause, and then she said, I'm proud of you, Claire. You're doing what's best for you. I sighed, a sense of contentment washing over me. Yeah, it's been tough, but I feel stronger, you know? I'm finally standing up for myself. Lisa's voice brightened. Speaking of standing up for yourself, how's the restaurant doing? I glanced out the window, a sense of determination building within me. It's going great. I've been creating new dishes, experimenting. I feel alive in the kitchen again. That's the Claire I know, Lisa said, her voice warm with affection. Hey, why don't you come over tonight? Cook us one of your amazing dishes, and we can catch up. I laughed, the sound light and genuine. I'd love that, Lisa. It'll be nice to cook for friends again. After hanging up, I looked around my kitchen, a space that was once a battlefield of marital disputes and now a sanctuary of my independence. I picked up a photo from the counter, one of me and Alex in happier times. For a moment, I allowed myself to remember the good times, the love that once was. Then, with a deep breath, I put the photo away in a drawer. It was part of my past, a chapter that had closed. As I prepared for the day, I felt a sense of excitement for what lay ahead. The divorce had been a difficult journey, but it was also a journey of self-discovery and empowerment. That evening, as I cooked in Lisa's kitchen, laughter and chatter filling the room, I realized this was what happiness felt like. No pretense, no pressure, just me being me. As we sat down to eat, Lisa raised her glass. To new beginnings, Claire. I raised mine, a smile spreading across my face. To new beginnings.
I'm Anna, and this story isn't just mine. It's about the life I shared with Michael, my husband, and how everything we built together slowly unraveled. We met in college, two dreamers with ambitions as high as the stars. Michael was the kind of guy who could light up a room with his laugh, simple yet charming, always with a kind word for everyone. We fell in love, graduated, and, as luck would have it, started our careers at the same company. Life was good, simple, and blissfully happy. Our evenings were the highlight of my days. We'd come home, cook together, and share stories about our work. Michael was a good listener, always interested in my day, my ideas. He was supportive, proud of our equal standing at work, our shared ambitions. Anna, you're amazing at what you do, he'd say with a smile. I love that we're in this together. But then, everything changed when Michael got promoted. It was a significant achievement, and initially, I was overjoyed. But with the promotion came a change I hadn't anticipated. Michael started to care more about appearances, about status. He wasn't the same man I'd fallen in love with. Slowly, his criticism began. First, it was subtle, a comment here or there. Why do we always eat the same meals? We can afford better now, he'd remark, pushing his plate away. I tried to adapt, to please him, but nothing seemed good enough. He began to critique my clothing, my shopping choices, even how I decorated our home. Why do you always buy the cheapest brands? We're not college students anymore, Anna, he'd say, his voice laced with annoyance. I felt a growing distance between us, a chasm that I didn't know how to bridge. The man I loved, who once found joy in our simple life, was now obsessed with wealth and status. One evening, after I returned from grocery shopping with more budget-friendly items, Michael's frustration boiled over. Anna, this isn't acceptable. You're still dressing and shopping like we're on a tight budget. You don't match my status, he said coldly, his words cutting through me like a knife. His words lingered in the air, marking the end of our simple, happy days. That was the moment I realized how much he had changed, how much our life had diverged from the path we once walked together. It was the beginning of the end, the start of a journey I never expected to take. As days turned into weeks, the strain in our relationship only deepened. Michael's constant critiques about how I didn't match his status weighed heavily on me. I missed the man he used to be, the one who found joy in our simple life together. But as his obsession with wealth and appearances grew, our connection continued to fade. In the midst of this growing distance, life threw us a curveball. I discovered I was pregnant. The news brought a mix of emotions, joy, fear, and a glimmer of hope that this might bring us back together. Michael's reaction to the pregnancy was surprisingly warm. His face, which had been etched with dissatisfaction for so long, lit up when I told him. "Really? We're going to have a baby?" he exclaimed, his voice filled with an excitement I hadn't heard in ages. For the first time in months, I saw a spark of the old Michael. During my pregnancy, he was attentive and caring, often checking in on me and ensuring I was comfortable. It felt like a breath of fresh air, a brief return to the days when we were a team. When our son, David, was born, Michael's joy was palpable. Holding David for the first time, he looked at me with tears in his eyes. "He's perfect, Anna. We made this beautiful boy," he said, his voice choked with emotion. The early days with David were a blur of sleepless nights and new routines, but they were also filled with moments of tenderness and joy. Michael, despite his busy schedule, tried to be there for David's first milestones. Watching him with our son, I saw glimpses of the man I had fallen in love with. With David's arrival, our relationship found a temporary peace. The arguments and criticisms subsided, replaced by shared moments of wonder over our son. It was as if David's presence healed some of the fractures in our marriage. I cherished this period, hoping it would last, that maybe this was the turning point we needed. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just a brief respite, a calm before another storm. For now, though, I held on to the hope that our family could find its way back to the happiness we once knew. Life with a newborn was a whirlwind, and for a while, it seemed to bridge the gap between Michael and me. But as David grew and the novelty of new fatherhood faded for Michael, the old patterns began to resurface. Michael's work consumed him more than ever, and when he was home, his attention was more focused on showing off David than actually bonding with him. He would buy our son the most expensive toys and clothes, things a toddler would never appreciate. One evening, I found Michael online, browsing through a list of elite preschools. He didn't even look up as I entered the room. "Anna, I'm thinking of enrolling David in St. James Academy. It's the best in the city," he said, not asking but telling. I sat beside him, trying to keep my voice calm. "Michael, he's just 2. Do we really need to send him to such an expensive school?" He finally looked at me, his expression one of disbelief. "Of course, we do. He's my son. He deserves the best." "But he needs time to be a kid, Michael. Love and attention, not just the most expensive things," I argued, feeling a familiar frustration. Michael shook his head, dismissing my concerns. "You don't understand, Anna. It's about giving him opportunities I never had." This was our new normal. Conversations turned into debates, and debates into arguments. It felt like we were speaking different languages. I longed for the days when our dreams and values aligned. The distance between us wasn't just emotional, it became physical. Michael often returned late from work, long after David and I had dinner. One night, when he came home at an ungodly hour, I couldn't hold back my frustration. "Michael, it's past midnight. You missed dinner again? David asked about you," I said, my voice laced with exhaustion. He shrugged off his coat, weary yet indifferent. "I'm the head of the department now, Anna. These late nights are just part of the job." "But what about us, Michael? What about your family?" I pleaded, hoping to reach some part of the man I married. He paused, his face a mix of fatigue and annoyance. "I'm doing all this for our family, Anna. You and David are living comfortably because of my hard work." I wanted to argue, to tell him that comfort wasn't just about money, but I was too tired. It was the same argument, and I knew I couldn't change his mind. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the faint clicks of his laptop from the other room, I realized that our little family was drifting apart. My husband, once my partner in every aspect of life, was now a stranger living under the same roof, connected only by a shared past and a son who deserved better than this growing void between his parents. It was during one of those long, silent evenings that I made a decision. I needed to go back to work, to find a piece of the woman I used to be before the distance with Michael grew too vast. The perfect opportunity came when a position opened up at my old company, the same place where Michael and I had started our journey together. Feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement, I decided to broach the subject with Michael. "Michael, I've been thinking of going back to work. There's an opening in my old department," I said, hoping for his support. His reaction was immediate and strong. "Go back to work? Why would you need to do that? I'm making more than enough for both of us," he replied, barely looking up from his laptop. I tried to explain. "It's not about the money, Michael. It's about me, about feeling like I'm contributing, being part of a team again." Michael finally looked at me, his expression one of disapproval. "You can contribute by taking care of David and the house. That's your team now." I couldn't hide my frustration. "But I need more than that. I want to use my skills, feel professional achievement again. Besides, it's good for David to see both his parents working." Michael stood up, his voice rising. "You going back to work, especially at my company, is not a good idea. What will people think? That I can't provide for my family?" I was taken aback by his attitude. "So this is about your image, your status?" He ignored my question and continued. "Look at yourself, Anna. You've changed. You've let yourself go since having David." His words were like a slap in the face. I felt my cheeks burning with a mix of anger and hurt. "What do you mean, I've let myself go?" "You know what I mean. You've gained weight. You hardly take care of yourself. It's not a good look, especially not for the wife of a department head," he said, his tone cold and detached. I was speechless, my heart pounding in my chest. The man who once loved me for who I was now stood there, criticizing my appearance, my worth. "And frankly," he added, his words cutting deeper, "I would be embarrassed to have you working at the company looking like this. I will be ashamed at work for such an ugly wife." I stood there, frozen, as he walked out of the room. His words echoed in my mind, a cruel reminder of how far we had drifted apart. That night, I lay awake, Michael's words replaying over and over. It was clear now. The man I married, the man I loved, was gone, replaced by someone I no longer recognized. The days following Michael's harsh critique were some of the loneliest I had ever experienced. His words had cut deep, leaving me to question not just our relationship, but my self-worth. In the midst of this turmoil, an unexpected incident occurred that changed everything. It was a typical Thursday afternoon when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a delivery man holding a large, extravagant bouquet of flowers. Confused, I accepted the bouquet and the accompanying card, thinking maybe Michael was attempting an awkward apology. But as I opened the card, my heart sank. The words were like a punch to the gut. "To the most beautiful and perfect woman in the world, with the most charming youth and slender waist, which can be embraced with 2 hands." The words mocked me, a stark contrast to what Michael had said just days before. I felt a mix of anger and humiliation wash over me. This wasn't for me. It couldn't be. It was then I noticed the mistake in the address. The bouquet was meant for someone else. As I stood there trying to process this, My phone rang. It was Michael's new secretary, a young girl who had just started working for him. Michael had mentioned her once, laughing about how she was still studying and often mixed things up. "Mrs. Smith, I'm so sorry. I think I've made a terrible mistake," she said, her voice anxious. "What mistake?" I asked, though I already had an idea. "The flowers. They were meant for someone else." "I'm so sorry. I sent them to the wrong address," she admitted, sounding flustered. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "Who were they meant for?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The secretary hesitated. I don't know her name. I'm just asked to send flowers and gifts sometimes. Please don't tell Mr. Smith I called." After we hung up, I stood in the middle of the living room, the unfaithful bouquet mocking me from the table. The realization of Michael's betrayal hit me hard. I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. Without a second thought, I packed a bag for myself and David. I grabbed some of his favorite toys, his clothes, and the essentials. I couldn't stay in that house a moment longer, surrounded by the life I thought we had, which now felt like a lie. I left a note for Michael on the kitchen counter. I didn't wait for him to come home to offer excuses or explanations. I took David, who was confused but excited for an impromptu visit to Auntie's house, and left. Driving to my sister's place, I felt a strange mix of relief and heartache. The life I had known was crumbling, but I knew I needed to get away, to find some space to think and to protect David from the fallout. That evening, as I sat in my sister's living room, lost in thought, Michael showed up unexpectedly. He looked frantic, a stark contrast to his usual composed self. "Anna, why did you leave? Why did you take David?" he asked, his voice tinged with a mix of concern and anger. I confronted him directly. "Why? Maybe because of the bouquet sent to your mistress, mistakenly delivered to your wife," I said, my voice steady but filled with hurt. Michael's face fell. That was a misunderstanding. The secretary, she made a mistake. I swear, there's nothing going on." I looked at him, trying to find a hint of the truth in his eyes, but all I saw was desperation. "A mistake? Is that your best explanation?" Before he could respond, I pulled out a packet of photos and laid them on the table. "Then how do you explain these, Michael?" His eyes widened as he looked at the photos of him with a young woman, clearly more than just colleagues. Where did you get these?" he stammered. "I hired a private detective. He's been very thorough. Did you know she's the wife of your business partner?" I asked, watching as the color drained from his face. Michael looked like he'd been punched in the gut. "You can't let these get out. It'll ruin everything," he pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper. I felt a bitter laugh escape me. "Ruin everything? What about us, Michael? What about our family?" He reached out, but I pulled away. "Anna, please, I'm begging you. Forgive me. I can fix this." But it was too late for apologies, too late for forgiveness. "Forgive you after you've lied and cheated? I can't, Michael, I won't. I'm filing for divorce, and these photos, they'll ensure I get what David and I deserve." Michael looked defeated, his shoulders slumping as the reality of the situation hit him. "Anna, please." But I had made up my mind. "No, Michael, you've made your choice. Now I'm making mine." As he left, I knew that this was the end of our marriage. The evidence in my hands was more than just proof of his infidelity. It was the key to a new beginning for me and David. The road ahead would be hard, but I was determined to rebuild our lives, free from lies and betrayal. The following weeks were a blur of legal meetings and tough decisions. I had initiated the divorce proceedings, armed with the evidence of Michael's infidelity. Despite the turmoil, there was a sense of determination within me. I was fighting not just for my own dignity, but for a better future for David. One afternoon, I met with my lawyer to discuss the details of the divorce. "We have a strong case, Anna. The evidence you provided is more than enough to ensure a favorable outcome for you and David," she said, her voice confident. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. "I just want this to be over. I want to ensure that David is taken care of," my lawyer assured me. "We'll make sure of that. You'll have custody, and with Michael's position, child support won't be an issue." As the days passed, the reality of my new life began to set in. I was going to be a single mother, a role I never anticipated. But I also felt a growing sense of empowerment. I was making decisions, standing up for myself and my son. The final hearing was a tense affair. Michael and I sat on opposite sides of the courtroom, the air thick with unspoken words. When the judge granted the divorce, citing Michael's infidelity, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was officially free from a marriage that had become a source of pain and betrayal. Outside the courtroom, Mikhail approached me. "Anna, I'm sorry. I never wanted it to end like this," he said, his voice laced with defeat. I looked at him, seeing the man I once loved, now a stranger. "It didn't have to be this way, Michael, but you made your choices." He nodded, a look of resignation on his face. "I just hope one day you can forgive me, for David's sake." I took a deep breath. "I'll always do what's best for David, but as for us, there's nothing left to say." Walking away from the courthouse, I felt a sense of closure. The divorce was not just the end of my marriage, but the beginning of a new chapter. I had stood up for myself, fought for what was right, and in the end, I had come out stronger. The finalization of the divorce marked the start of a new chapter in my life. It was a time of rebuilding, not just for me, but for David as well. We had both been through so much, and now it was time to look forward to a future that was ours to shape. One sunny afternoon, as David played in my sister's backyard, I sat with her on the porch, a cup of coffee in hand. "You know, I never thought I'd be here, starting over like this," I said, watching David chase butterflies. My sister, always my rock, smiled at me. "But you're not just starting over, Anna. You're starting fresh. There's a difference. You're stronger now, more aware of what you want and don't want." I nodded, feeling the truth in her words. "Yeah, I guess you're right. It's all so overwhelming at times." She reached over, squeezing my hand. "It's going to be okay. You've got this, and you've got us, always." I smiled, grateful for her support. "Thanks. I don't know what I'd do without you." As the days turned into weeks, I began to find my footing again. I returned to work, where I was greeted with warmth and understanding. It felt good to be back, to be productive and to engage with colleagues who respected and valued me. David, too, was adjusting. He missed his father, but we made sure he had regular visits. I wanted to ensure that, despite everything, he had a relationship with Michael. After all, whatever had happened between Michael and me, he was still David's dad. One evening, as I tucked David into bed, he looked up at me with his big, innocent eyes. "Mommy, are you happy?" he asked, his voice soft. I kissed his forehead, feeling a surge of love for my little boy. "Yes, David, I am. And I want you to always be happy too." He smiled, a sleepy, content smile. "I am, Mommy. I love you." "I love you too, sweetheart." "More than anything," I whispered, turning off his light. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the journey I had been on. I thought about the future, uncertain but promising. I had dreams to chase, a career to build, and a beautiful son to raise. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but I was ready to face it head on. As I drifted off to sleep, I realized that this wasn't just a new beginning. It was a chance to write my own story, on my own terms. And with that thought, I welcomed the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead, ready to embrace them with an open heart and a newfound strength.
I'm Jane. I had just turned 28 when I thought I met the love of my life, Mike, and everything happened so fast. We were married within a year of meeting. Mike is an accountant, tall, with a laugh that could light up any room. I work in digital marketing, love to paint on weekends, and I have always been more of a planner. We balanced each other out, or so I thought. It was the day after our wedding, and our living room was piled high with wrapped presents and envelopes. There was a chaotic beauty to it all, the remnants of our celebration. That's when Mike's parents, Carol and Dave, dropped by. I hadn't really gotten to know them since we got married so quickly, but they seemed all right, normal even. As we started opening gifts, I noticed Carol and Dave were more than just a little interested in the contents. "Is that a crystal vase?" Carol asked, picking up a shimmering piece that my aunt had given us. She turned it over in her hands, eyes gleaming. "Yeah, it's from my Aunt Linda. Pretty, isn't it?" I said, trying to nudge her attention away from claiming it. Before I knew it, Carol had placed it in a separate pile to the side. "I think we can find a good place for this at our house," she said nonchalantly. Mike didn't seem to notice, busy untangling a set of fancy kitchen gadgets from his cousin. I shot him a look, hoping he'd say something. "Mom, that's our wedding gift," Mike finally said with an easy smile, as if it was all a big joke. "Oh, come on. It'll just collect dust here. We'll use it," Dave chimed in, wrapping an arm around Carol. "Besides, you two are young. You'll get plenty more gifts over the years." I tried to laugh it off with them, but it felt off. "Actually, I was thinking it would look great in our foyer," I said, attempting to claim it back without causing a scene. Carol looked at me, her expression a mix of surprise and annoyance. "Jane, you need to learn to share. We're family now, and families help each other out," she said, her tone firm, as if she was teaching me some sort of lesson. Mike, catching the tension, quickly jumped in. "Let's not worry about this now. We've got plenty of gifts, right, Jane?" I nodded, biting back my words. But as they continued to sift through the gifts, setting aside a few choice items for themselves, that uncomfortable feeling settled deep in my stomach. It was like watching strangers claim parts of my life as their own. And Mike, well, he just let them. Our first year of marriage flew by, and before I knew it, our anniversary had arrived. I wanted to make it special, a celebration of us. So I booked a table at Chez Louis, a cozy little spot we both loved. I thought it would be romantic to have Mike's parents join us, to show them they're important to us. As we sat down at the restaurant, Carol and Dave were already there, menus in hand. "This place is fancy," Carol said, eyeing the chandeliers. Mike squeezed my hand under the table, a silent thank you for organizing it all. The waiter came by and we started to order. I went for the salmon, Mike's favorite, and I noticed Carol's eyes darting down the menu to the most expensive items. "We'll have the lobster and the filet mignon," she declared, pointing at the priciest things without a second glance. Dave nodded in agreement. "And why not throw in a bottle of your best wine?" he added, winking at the waiter. I could feel my smile stiffening. "Quite the celebration, huh?" I tried to keep my voice light. Mike shrugged. "It's a special night," he said. "Let's not think about the cost tonight." The conversation was light for the most part, but I couldn't help but notice how Carol and Dave savored the food like it was their last meal, almost oblivious to the price tag I knew would come at the end. As we ate, I couldn't shake the feeling of being taken advantage of. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was the principle. It was our anniversary, and it felt like it was being hijacked. When the check arrived, I saw Mike's eyes widen a little, but he quickly recovered and handed his card to the waiter. On our way out, Carol looped her arm through mine. "You know, Jane, this was just lovely. We should do it again next year," she said, a satisfied smile on her face. Thanksgiving was around the corner, and with it came the start of the holiday season. Mike and I had started to decorate the house, a mix of fall colors and early Christmas cheer. It was cozy, the kind of place you'd want to come back to after a long day. One evening, as we were stringing up some lights around the living room windows, Mike's phone pinged with a message. He read it and laughed. "Oh, my parents are ahead of the game. They've already sent their Christmas wish list." I was untangling another set of lights and looked up. "Wish list?" "Yeah, they send one every year. Helps with shopping," he explained, his fingers scrolling through his phone. Curiosity got the better of me. So, what's on this famous list? Mike hesitated, then handed me his phone. The list was extensive. Top-tier electronics, designer clothes, luxury items that they probably didn't even need. I scrolled through in disbelief. They can't be serious, I said. This is a lot. Mike took his phone back and shrugged. They like the good stuff. What can I say? I didn't know how to respond. There was a knot forming in the pit of my stomach. Mike's birthday was also coming up, and I'd been so excited to give him the watch he'd been eyeing for months. Now it felt like any gift would be less about us and more about fulfilling a list. When it came to us making our list, I couldn't help but feel petty making one at all. Maybe we should just ask for charitable donations in our name, I suggested half-heartedly. Mike laughed. Good one, but seriously, what do you want? You need a new laptop, right? The holidays rolled around, and I got Carol and Dave a nice coffee maker. Nothing too fancy but practical. They, in turn, gave me a set of scented candles. They were nice, but the difference was stark. I didn't say anything. Mike seemed happy with the fancy drone they got him, though. The unspoken rule was clear. We were expected to give big and receive small. It didn't feel right, but bringing it up only seemed to cause tension. So, I kept quiet, wrapping gifts and pasting on a smile for the holidays. But inside, I was beginning to count the costs, not just in dollars, but in the emotional toll this was starting to take. I was at my desk, staring at the computer screen when the email notification popped up. It was my quarterly bonus, bigger than I had expected. My first thought was to do something meaningful with it, something for Mike and me. So, I booked us a trip to Paris. We had talked about going since we met, and it felt like the perfect time to make that dream happen. That night over dinner, I told Mike about the surprise. His face lit up like I'd never seen before. Paris? Really? Babe, that's amazing! He exclaimed, getting up to kiss me. I was basking in the joy of the moment when his phone rang. It was his mom. I could tell by the way his face changed. Yeah, she booked us a trip to Paris, he said into the phone, and I knew I should have asked him not to say anything just yet. Mike's enthusiasm dwindled as he listened more and more. I know you've always wanted to go. He trailed off, looking at me with a pained expression. I felt my heart sink. He hung up and there was a heavy silence. They want to come with us, he said finally, almost like he was asking for permission. I sat there, my fork halfway to my mouth, paused in midair. To Paris? With us? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Yeah. They said they've never been and always wanted to go, Mike explained, running a hand through his hair. I think we should take them. The room felt suddenly too small. It's supposed to be for us, Mike. Our trip, I said, feeling a tightness in my chest. He didn't respond at first, then, I know, but they're getting older, and I feel bad. They've done so much for me. I thought about all the one-sided gift exchanges, the anniversary dinner, and every other little thing that had piled up over the past year. But this is our time, I insisted, my voice firm. We can plan a trip with them another time. This bonus, it's for us. Mike sighed, a deep, frustrated sound. They won't understand that. You know how they are. And you know how hard I've worked for this, I said, the words like stones in my mouth. I want us to enjoy it together, just us, like we planned. Mike didn't say anything for a while. Then, okay, we'll tell them some other time might work better. But when the time came to tell them, Mike's words faltered. Look, maybe we can all go together next year, he offered, but Carol was having none of it. Why next year? We can afford it now, she retorted over the speakerphone, her voice laced with disappointment. I couldn't take it anymore. Because this trip is for us, Carol, Mike and I. We need this time together, I said, unable to hide my frustration. There was a pause, then Carol said, Well, that's very selfish of you, Jane. Very selfish indeed. After the call, the air between Mike and me was tense. He was torn, I could tell, but this was one thing I wasn't willing to budge on. Paris was meant to be a dream trip for us, and I wasn't going to let that dream be taken away. Mike became a shadow in his own home, leaving early for work and coming back late. Our conversations dwindled to monosyllables. "Dinner's in the oven," I'd say when I heard the garage door open, my voice echoing off the empty walls. "Thanks," he'd reply, a hollow word that hung in the air between us. I missed him, missed us. I yearned for the easy days when we'd dream together on the couch, our plans and laughter intertwined. I longed to reach out to him, to break through the invisible barrier that had erected itself after the argument over Paris. But every attempt felt like speaking through a thick glass wall. I could see him, but I couldn't reach him. One particularly hard evening, I sat at the dinner table across from Mike, the sound of his fork against the plate drilling into the silence. I cleared my throat. "Mike, this can't go on," I started, my voice barely above a whisper, fearful of shattering the fragile peace. "We need to talk about what happened. We can't let this silence be the new normal for us." Mike continued to eat, his expression unreadable. Then he set down his fork, a sign that I had his attention, even if just for a moment. "What do you want me to say, Jane?" he asked, a hint of weariness seeping through. "I want to understand why you're taking this so hard, why it feels like you're choosing them over me," I replied, the hurt evident in my tone. He sighed, his hands folded in front of him. "They're my parents, Jane. They've been hoping to go to Paris their whole lives." "And what about what we've been hoping for? Our plans? Our dreams?" My own frustration started to bubble up, words becoming more pointed, desperate to bridge the gap between us. Mike ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of exasperation I'd come to recognize. I know," he said, and for a moment, I saw the flicker of the man I married, conflicted and torn, but not indifferent. "It's just, they've always been there for me. I feel obligated, you know." "But where does that leave us, Mike?" I pressed, leaning forward, trying to catch his eye. "What about our marriage?" He didn't respond right away, and in that pause, I felt a wave of fear. Fear that maybe we weren't as solid as I had believed, that maybe the foundation we had built was less rock and more sand, easily eroded by the steady tide of his parents' needs and wants. "It's supposed to be us against the world, Mike, not me against you and them," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the emotion welling up inside me. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I could see the conflict warring within him. "I know, Jane. I just don't know how to make everyone happy." "That's just it," I said, a sudden clarity washing over me. We can't always make everyone happy. But we made vows to each other, Mike. Doesn't that count for something?" He nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on the table before finding mine. "It does. It counts for a lot." The rest of the meal passed in a contemplative silence, a change from the strained quiet that had become our norm. It was as if my words had planted a seed, or perhaps watered one that had been lying dormant within Mike all this time. The morning sun poured in through the windows, but the warmth it usually brought seemed to have no place in our home today. I woke up to an eerie quiet, the other side of the bed untouched from the night before. The emptiness of the house felt like a heavy blanket, suffocating in its silence. Rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I reached for my phone, expecting the usual absence of messages, given the silent treatment that had taken residence in our home. Instead, my screen was flooded with notifications, all from my bank. A lump formed in my throat as I read the details. Multiple transactions, including airline tickets and a pair of hotel bookings in Paris, all made while I was asleep. The timestamps on the emails told me the flight would have left hours ago. Mike and his parents were already on their way to Paris, using my hard-earned bonus to fund a trip I was meant to be on. Disbelief turned to anger, and then to a crushing sense of betrayal. I sat there, the phone heavy in my hand as the reality settled in. Mike had access to my account. I'd trusted him implicitly, never imagining he would abuse that trust. Yet, here it was in stark black and white, a digital paper trail of deceit. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The one person I had believed would stand by me had chosen his own comfort over our relationship. I thought back to all the times I'd brushed aside the little signs, the excuses I'd made for him, for us. With trembling fingers, I dialed his number, knowing full well he wouldn't answer. Not with the time difference, not with my previous ultimatum ringing in his ears. "Mike," I began, the beep of the voicemail almost mocking in its cheerfulness. "I saw the charges. You took your parents to Paris with my bonus. I don't even know what to say, but I hope it's worth it. I hope it's worth everything." The house felt even emptier after the call, the walls closing in on me with the weight of everything unsaid, and now, perhaps, never to be spoken. I sat at the kitchen table, the silence a stark contrast to the chaos raging within me. They had left, just like that, with no regard for me or the life we were supposed to be building together. I canceled the hotel rooms, the return flights, every piece of the trip that was connected to my finances. With each cancellation, I felt a piece of my old life fall away, the future I'd envisioned evaporating before my eyes. By the time I was done, there was nothing left to do but act. I contacted the bank and removed Mike's access to my accounts, a finality in each click that felt both terrifying and liberating. The man I had married, the family I had tried to be a part of, they were all just strangers now. Strangers who had used me, who had seen my generosity as something to exploit rather than cherish. I packed my bags with a robotic efficiency, each item a reminder of a dream I had to put away. There was no going back from this, no gentle words or apologies that could mend the rift that his betrayal had caused. Mike had chosen his path, and in doing so, he had set me on mine. The ring I'd once worn with pride lay cold and heavy in my palm. I set it down on the counter, its sparkle mocking in the morning light, and with one last look at the life I was leaving behind, I closed the door on the house that was never truly a home. It was late afternoon when I finally left the house. My car was packed with clothes and essentials, a stark reminder of the sudden turn my life had taken. As I drove, the messages began to flood in. One from Mike, several from his mother. I pulled over to read them, knowing they'd only fuel the fire of my resolve. Mike's message read, "Jane, please, we need to talk about this. Can't we just discuss it?" His words seemed hollow, almost insulting in their simplicity. I started to type a response, then stopped. No words would bridge the chasm between us. His mother's messages were a mix of confusion and anger. "What's going on? Why have you canceled our rooms? Call me." I imagined her sitting in a cafe in Paris, expecting luxury and finding complication. I turned the phone off. They were in the middle of a trip funded by deceit. They could figure it out. My first stop was the bank. I needed to ensure my finances were completely secure. The bank manager, a middle-aged woman with a gentle face, greeted me. "I need to make sure all my accounts are locked down. My husband, he won't have access anymore," I explained, my voice steady despite the emotion I felt. "Of course," she nodded, offering a sympathetic smile. "Let's make sure you're protected." By the time I left the bank, my accounts were secure, and a new sense of determination settled within me. I drove to my sister's house, the only place I felt I could go. She opened the door before I could even knock. "Jane, I've been so worried," she said, pulling me into a hug. I allowed myself a moment to just be held, to let the reality of my situation be shared. "I can't believe he would do this to you," she said as we sat down at her kitchen table. "You deserve so much better." I nodded, swallowing hard against the lump in my throat. "I do, and that's why I'm not going back. I've canceled everything. I've left the house. I'm done, Sarah." She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "Good for you. What's your plan now?" I looked around the familiar room, feeling the first twinge of relief. "I'm not sure yet, but I'm starting with a divorce. I can't stay married to someone who has so little respect for me." Sarah's face was a mixture of anger and pride. "I'll support you however I can. Do you need a lawyer?" "I'll find one," I said, my voice growing firmer with each word. "I need someone who doesn't know Mike or his family. I need this cut clean." The conversation shifted as Sarah helped me unpack my car and make plans for the next few days. There was a strange comfort in the mundane tasks, a grounding in the midst of chaos. I was standing in the kitchen at my sister's house, a mug of coffee warming my hands when my phone vibrated with a persistence that felt all too familiar. It was Mike, again. "Jane, we need to talk. I'm sorry, I miss you, and I think we can work things out." His text read, a mixture of apology and plea. I sighed, the same rehearsed, "I'm sorry," becoming a threadbare blanket that no longer provided comfort or warmth. "Not this time, Mike," I muttered under my breath, typing a response that left no room for ambiguity. "There's nothing left to discuss. Please respect my decision." I could almost hear the desperation in the silence that followed, but it wasn't enough to make me reconsider. Not anymore. My resolve was tested further when, a few days later, Mike's parents made a dramatic appearance at my sister's doorstep. Their faces were twisted in anger as they barged past Sarah, who stood wide-eyed at the door. "You've got some nerve, Jane," his mother exclaimed, her voice shrill. "You ruined our family vacation. You're just a greedy, selfish woman." Sarah stepped between us, her stance protective. "That's enough! You're not going to come into my house and insult my sister." The argument escalated until the neighbors peeked out of their windows, and I was sure someone would call the police. It ended with Sarah threatening to do just that if they didn't leave. Their departure left a sour air that lingered long after they were gone. But amidst the chaos, a realization settled within me. I was truly done. The divorce process was a cold, legal ballet, and I danced my part, signing papers and nodding through explanations of settlements and divisions. But with each stroke of the pen, I felt a chain breaking, a tether loosening. And then it was over. I stood outside the courthouse, a free woman. The air was crisp, a gentle wind playing with the loose strands of my hair. Sarah hugged me tight, her support unwavering. "You did it, Jane," she whispered, pride evident in her voice. I had done it. I had stood up to the selfishness that tried to claim me, stood firm against the manipulation that sought to keep me bound. I turned away from the courthouse, away from a past that no longer held me. The messages from Mike continued for a while, a mix of apologies, bargaining, and eventually anger. But they went unread, floating in the digital void as I moved forward with my life. The apartment I rented was small, but bathed in sunlight. I filled it with plants, books, and new memories. I went back to school, enrolling in classes that fueled a passion for learning that I'd neglected. And one quiet evening, as I sat on my little balcony, a cup of tea in hand, I deleted Mike's number from my phone. I was free. Free to heal, free to grow, and most importantly, free to be unapologetically me. The first time I laid eyes on Michael was at a college seminar. We were both there for extra credits, though our paths were quite different. He was a business major while I was pursuing literature. I was drawn to him from the moment he raised his hand and posed a challenging question to the professor. After class, we found ourselves at the same coffee shop, and from there, it just seemed like the universe wanted us to be together. We chatted about everything, from college, hobbies, to our childhood memories. "I come from a pretty strict background," he mentioned, taking a sip from his cup. "My parents are deeply religious." I remember shrugging. "So? My parents are free thinkers. They always taught me to question everything." Michael laughed. "Sounds like we're from different planets." But despite our differences, there was an undeniable chemistry. We began to see each other more frequently, studying together and exploring the city during the weekends. About 2 years into our relationship, we decided to move in together. It was a practical decision. Our apartments were far from the university, and sharing a place made sense. Plus, we were inseparable by then. However, when Michael broke the news to his parents, it wasn't received well. At a dinner at their house, Mrs. Davis, Michael's mother, was the first to voice her concerns. "Living together before marriage? Michael, you know how we feel about that." Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mom, times have changed. It's not a big deal." Mr. Davis chimed in. "In our house it is. You're living in sin." I could feel the weight of their stares. Wanting to ease the tension, I said, "We respect your beliefs, but this is our decision. We're adults." Mrs. Davis sighed. "It's just not the way we raised you." Michael took my hand. "Lizzie and I love each other. We want to start our life together, and I hope you can support that." The evening ended on a somber note, but Michael and I were firm in our decision. We found a cozy apartment close to campus and moved in. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Our bond grew stronger, but the strain with his parents was always in the background, like an old radio playing a sad tune. One evening, as we were settling into our new life, there was a knock on the door. It was Mrs. Davis, holding a pie. "I thought I'd come by and see how you two are doing," she said, looking around with a critical eye. "We're doing great, Mrs. Davis," I replied, trying to be cordial. She sat down, placing the pie on the table. "This is all temporary, right? You'll get married soon?" Michael cleared his throat. "We haven't decided that yet, Mom." As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the constant pressure from Michael's parents started to weigh on us. Our once carefree dates and movie nights began to have a shadow, the looming expectation of marriage. One evening, while we were making dinner together in our tiny kitchen, Michael broached the subject. "Lizzie, have you ever thought about, having a wedding?" I looked up from chopping the vegetables, surprised. "Like, for us? Are you proposing?" He smiled awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Not exactly. I mean, yes, I want to marry you someday, but right now, it's more about my parents. Maybe if we had a ceremony, they'd back off." I sighed. "So you're saying a wedding without the legal paperwork?" He nodded. "Just a thought. We can invite friends, make it a fun day. My parents get their wedding, and we get some peace." It wasn't the romantic proposal I'd imagined, but I understood his reasoning. "All right," I said slowly, "but on one condition. We do it our way. No big church wedding, just something small and intimate." Michael grinned, relief evident on his face. "Deal." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparations. We chose a beautiful outdoor venue, invited our close friends and family, and planned a simple but heartfelt ceremony. When we broke the news to his parents, their reaction was surprisingly subdued. "An outdoor wedding?" Mrs. Davis asked, raising an eyebrow. "Well, it's unconventional, but if it means you two are taking the next step, I suppose we can support it." Mr. Davis added, "As long as you're committed to each other, that's what matters." The day of the wedding was sunny and bright. I wore a simple white dress, and Michael looked dashing in his suit. Our friends cheered, and even Michael's parents seemed genuinely happy. During the reception, Mrs. Davis pulled me aside. "Lizzie, I want to apologize," she began, her voice soft. "I know we've been hard on you two, but seeing you together today, I realize that love is what truly matters." I smiled, touched by her words. "Thank you, Mrs. Davis. That means a lot." The day ended on a high note, with everyone dancing and celebrating our love. It felt like we had finally won Michael's parents over, and I hoped this would be a fresh start for us. But as days passed, their daily visits began. They'd drop by unannounced, often with unsolicited advice or thinly veiled criticisms. It was as if the wedding had given them a free pass to interfere in our lives. One evening, as Michael and I were unwinding after a long day, there was a knock at the door. Opening it, I found Mrs. Davis holding a casserole dish. "Just thought I'd drop off some dinner," she said, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thanks," I replied, taking the dish. "But you don't have to do this." She waved a hand dismissively. "It's no trouble. I just thought, since you're always so busy, you might not have time to cook." I forced a smile, sensing the underlying judgment. "We manage, but thanks anyway." As the door closed, I sighed deeply. Michael wrapped an arm around me. "It'll be okay," he whispered. It started with the subtle comments, the not-so-innocent questions. "Why is the house so messy?" Or, "Have you considered cooking something more nutritious?" Mrs. Davis would ask, her tone dripping with faux concern. One day, I came home from work, exhausted, to find her in our living room, reorganizing our bookshelves. "Mrs. Davis, what are you doing?" I asked, taken aback. She looked up, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "Just thought I'd help tidy up a bit. These shelves looked so cluttered." Michael entered from the kitchen, holding 2 cups of tea. "Mom's just helping out, Lizzie," he said, trying to play mediator. I took a deep breath, my patience waning. "This is our home, Michael. We didn't ask for help. Mrs. Davis pursed her lips, her eyes watering. I'm just trying to be helpful. After all, now we're family. Days like these became more frequent. They'd pop by without notice, giving advice we never asked for, criticizing decisions we'd made together as a couple. It was clear they no longer saw boundaries. One evening, after a particularly trying visit from his parents, Michael and I sat down for a heart-to-heart. Michael, this has to stop, I began, my voice trembling with frustration. I can't live like this, feeling like I'm constantly being judged in my own home. He ran his fingers through his hair, looking equally stressed. I know, Lizzie, it's just, they're my parents. I don't know how to tell them to back off without hurting their feelings. I replied, but what about our feelings, our peace of mind? We can't keep sacrificing that for them. A week later, we invited them over for dinner, deciding to address the issue head-on. The evening started off pleasantly enough. We chatted about work, friends, and the latest news. But as the main course was served, I took a deep breath and dove in. Mrs. Davis, Mr. Davis, we invited you over because there's something we need to discuss, I began, trying to keep my voice steady. Mr. Davis looked up, his fork pausing mid-air. What's the matter? I exchanged a glance with Michael, who nodded in encouragement. It's about the frequent visits and, well, the constant input on our lives. Mrs. Davis looked taken aback. We're just trying to help. Michael took over. Mom, Dad, we appreciate that you care, but it's becoming overwhelming. We need some space to live our lives, make our mistakes, and grow together. Tears formed in Mrs. Davis's eyes. After all we've done for you, this is how you repay us? Mr. Davis added, his voice stern. We're just looking out for you. It seems Lizzie here doesn't appreciate family. I felt a pang of guilt, but stood my ground. It's not about appreciation. It's about respect, respecting our boundaries and our choices. The room grew silent, the tension palpable. Mrs. Davis dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, her shoulders shaking. We just wanted to be part of your lives. I never thought it'd come to this. Michael looked torn, his loyalty divided, but he held firm. Mom, we love you, but this is our life. We need you to understand that. The evening ended with Mrs. Davis in tears, Mr. Davis looking disappointed, and an unspoken agreement that things had to change. As they left, I felt a mix of relief and dread, wondering what the future held for our relationships. Days after the confrontation, the house felt unusually quiet. The constant visits had stopped, but the silence was both a relief and a curse. Every time the doorbell rang or there was a knock, my heart would race, expecting it to be Michael's parents. But it never was. One evening, as Michael and I sat on our couch, he broached the topic. Lizzie, do you think we were too harsh? I mean, they're my parents. Maybe we overreacted? I took his hand, feeling its warmth. Michael, it's not about being harsh. It's about setting boundaries. We did what we had to do. He sighed deeply. I know, it's just hard. I never imagined being in this situation with them. As days turned into weeks, we began to feel the weight of our decision. There were no more surprise visits, but there were also no calls or messages. It was as if we had cut ties completely. During this period, I often found solace in browsing property listings online. One day, as I was scrolling through, a beautiful house in a neighboring town caught my eye. It had a large garden, a spacious living area, and most importantly, it was far away from our current life. Michael, come look at this, I called out. He joined me, peering at the screen. Wow, it's beautiful. But why are you looking at houses? I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. I was thinking, maybe it's time for a fresh start, somewhere new, where we can create our own memories, away from all this drama. He looked surprised. You mean move? Leave everything behind? I nodded. It's drastic, I know, but maybe it's what we need. We discussed it at length, weighing the pros and cons. The idea of starting anew was enticing, but also terrifying. Yet, the more we talked, the more it felt right. A few weeks later, we visited the house. It was even more beautiful in person, and the neighborhood seemed perfect. After much consideration, I decided to use the money I had inherited from my grandmother to buy it. The day we signed the papers, I felt a mix of emotions. Excitement for the new beginning, but also sadness for what we were leaving behind. The move went smoothly, and soon we were settling into our new home. It felt like a dream. The peace and quiet were just what we needed. One evening, as we were enjoying a quiet dinner in our new dining room, Michael said, "Lizzie, I think this was the best decision we ever made." I smiled, feeling content. I think so too. The first few months in our new home were like a dream. The mornings were quiet, filled with the chirping of birds, and the evenings brought a calm, tranquil energy. Michael and I fell into a comfortable routine, enjoying the privacy and peace that our new surroundings provided. The past seemed like a distant memory, and the tension that once surrounded our lives had all but disappeared. Until one fateful day. I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when the doorbell rang. Michael went to answer it. I heard murmurs, and then a familiar voice. My heart sank. It was Mrs. Davis. I walked to the entrance, my face revealing my shock. There they were, Mrs. and Mr. Davis, suitcases in tow, standing at our doorstep. "Mom? Dad? What are you doing here?" Michael asked, his voice filled with surprise. Mrs. Davis smiled, a bit too sweetly. "We missed you, dear, and we thought, why not pay a visit?" I tried to keep my composure. "It's unexpected." Mr. Davis chimed in. "We just wanted to see where our son is living now. Is that so wrong?" Michael seemed torn. "Of course not, but a heads up would have been nice." Mrs. Davis looked around, her eyes scanning our home. "Oh, what a lovely place you have here. Much nicer than the old one." I bristled but said nothing. The visit turned into a stay. One night became 2, then 3. They began to settle in, making themselves comfortable, much like they had in our previous home. One evening, after dinner, I pulled Michael aside. "Michael, we can't go down this road again. We moved to escape this." He sighed. "I know, Lizzie, but they're my parents. I can't just throw them out." "Then what? Let them take over our lives again?" Mrs. Davis, who seemed to have overheard our conversation, walked over, her eyes welling up with tears. "Is that how you feel, Michael? That we're a burden?" Michael looked helplessly at me, then back at his mother. "Mom, it's not like that. We just wish you had told us you were coming." She sniffled. "We just wanted to be close to our son, but it seems we're not welcome here either." I had a sinking feeling when I heard Michael's parents mention they'd made a decision about their living situation. The two of us had recently been discussing the matter privately, hoping to find a delicate way to address the issue. Now, it seemed the matter was going to be thrust into the open. "Lizzie, Michael," Mr. Davis began, "we have some news." Michael shifted in his seat, already sensing what was coming. "Go on," he prompted. Mrs. Davis, trying to sound cheerful, said, "We've sold our house. We realize there's no need for it when we have such a lovely family home here with you two." My eyes widened in shock. "You did what?" "We wanted to be closer to you both," Mr. Davis explained, looking earnest. Mrs. Davis looked hurt. "We are family. Why wouldn't you want us here?" I took a deep breath and said what I'd wanted to say for a long time. "This house, it's mine. It's not owned jointly by Michael and me. It's in my name only." I retrieved a file from the study, showing them the ownership documents. Mrs. Davis looked at the papers and then back at me, clearly stunned. "But you're married. What's yours is Michael's and vice versa." I smiled triumphantly. "That's where you're mistaken. We held a wedding ceremony, yes, but Michael and I never legally married. We never signed any official documents, so, technically, you're not my in-laws." The weight of my words seemed to hang in the air. Mrs. Davis's face turned a shade paler, her eyes widening in disbelief. Mr. Davis looked from me to Michael, seeking some form of denial. Michael took my hand, signaling his support. "It's true, Mom and Dad. We thought you'd be more accepting if we had a ceremony, but we never felt the need to get the state involved in our relationship." Mrs. Davis began to sob. "So, you deceived us? And now you're throwing us out?" The room was heavy with tension after the bombshells were dropped. Michael's parents were clearly taken aback, but it wasn't long before the shock turned into outrage. "So, you tricked everyone with a sham wedding? And you think that makes everything all right?" Mrs. Davis's voice had a hint of venom. Michael sighed. "It wasn't about tricking anyone. It was about the way we wanted to live our lives. The ceremony was for us, and those who wanted to celebrate our love." Mrs. Davis's face turned a shade redder. "You dare defy the sanctity of marriage, live together in sin, and then mock us with a fake wedding." "I've had enough," Mr. Davis declared, standing up suddenly. "You, young lady, are nothing but a sinner and a witch, trying to pull my son away from his family, his values." I was taken aback by the fierceness of their reaction, but I wouldn't let them intimidate me. "I have not taken Michael from anyone. He's made his own choices, and it's high time you respect them." Mrs. Davis's eyes were filled with tears, but her voice was stern. "Michael, come home with us. Leave this woman. She's done nothing but pull you into her web of deceit." Michael, ever the calm in the storm, replied, "Mom, Dad, I love you both, but my place is here, with her. She's been nothing but kind and understanding, even when you both haven't been. You can't just demand I leave her." "You're choosing her over us?" Mr. Davis's voice was a mix of anger and disbelief. "I'm choosing to live my life on my terms," Michael asserted. The room went silent for what felt like an eternity. The air was thick, every breath heavy. Mrs. Davis's face was a mask of hurt and betrayal. "Very well," she said, her voice cold. "But remember this, you're turning your back on your family, on your faith, all for her." "I'm not turning my back on anyone," Michael said. "I just wish you'd see that." Mrs. Davis's eyes were hard, her voice bitter. "Let's go," she said to her husband, not giving either of us another glance. And with that, they left, leaving behind a wake of hurt, confusion, and uncertainty. I looked at Michael, his face a mirror of my own feelings. We both knew that things had changed irrevocably, and there was no going back. A few days after the confrontation, as I was heading back from work, my neighbor, Mrs. Carlson, called out to me. She was an older lady, known for her daily walks and her uncanny ability to know everyone's business. "Did you hear about the Davis family not selling their house?" she asked with a knowing look. I paused, taken aback. "What do you mean?" She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "They never put their house on the market. I heard from Susan, who heard from Janice, who works at the town's real estate office. There's no record of the Davis property being up for sale." I felt a knot form in my stomach. Were they lying to us all this time? When I got home, I shared the information with Michael. He looked shocked. "I can't believe they'd lie to us. What were they trying to achieve?" We both knew the answer. They wanted to manipulate the situation to their advantage. The realization was a hard pill to swallow. All this time, while we tried to understand and accommodate them, they had been playing a game. Michael sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. This changes things. It's one thing to have disagreements, but outright deception? That's something else entirely. We can't keep letting them pull us into their manipulative games, I said firmly. We need boundaries, strong ones. Michael nodded. You're right. We can't continue like this. It's unhealthy for us and for our relationship. The next day, he went over to his parents' house. He needed to confront them, get some answers. When he returned, his face was a mix of anger and sadness. They admitted it, he began, his voice heavy. They thought that if they moved in with us, we'd be a proper family again. They felt threatened by our independence. We sat down, discussing our next steps. It was clear that for our own sanity and the health of our relationship, we needed distance from them. We need a break, Michael declared. Some time away from all this drama and manipulation. I agreed. It's the best decision for us right now. That evening, we sent a message to his parents, informing them of our decision. The reply was filled with anger and accusations, but we remained firm. We needed this, for ourselves and for our future. The next few weeks were quiet. We focused on each other, rebuilding the trust and closeness that had been strained over the past months. One evening, as we sat on our porch, looking at the stars, Michael turned to me. "Thank you," he whispered, "for standing by me, for fighting for us." I smiled, squeezing his hand. "Always." The journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but it was a poignant reminder of the importance of boundaries, honesty, and mutual respect in any relationship. As the night deepened, we looked towards the future, hoping for peace and understanding.
Hello there, my name's Sarah. I'm 27 and I've been working as a nurse for a while. My life has been a whirlwind of hospital shifts, patient checkups, and endless cups of coffee. The hospital corridors have been my world, and my social life? Well, that's been on life support for a while now. So, what's a girl to do when she's got no time to meet people the old-fashioned way? She goes online. I signed up for this dating site, nothing fancy, just one of those places where you hope to find someone who's not a complete weirdo. That's where I bumped into Ryan, virtually of course. His profile was plain, no show-off stuff. Just a guy with a genuine smile and a twinkle in his eyes. We started trading messages, and something clicked. We decided to meet up, see if this online chemistry had any basis in the real world. Our first date was at this cozy little cafe downtown. I walked in, and there he was, waiting for me. "Hey Sarah, you made it," he greeted, his face lighting up like a kid on Christmas morning. I was a bundle of nerves, but his easygoing nature calmed me down. We started chatting, just casual stuff at first. He was a software engineer, loved messing around with codes and all that. He was passionate about his work, but when he spoke about his mother, Margaret, his demeanor changed. "I'm all she's got, you know," he said, his voice dropping a bit. "My old man skipped out on us when I was just a kid. She's been alone since then. I try to help out, send her $1,000 every month. Ain't much, but it keeps her going." I admired his dedication, his sense of responsibility. I shared my own stories, about the grueling hours at the hospital, the emotional roller coaster that my job often was. He listened, really listened, not just nodding along. His eyes were full of understanding, and I felt a connection. As the weeks rolled by, I found myself falling for this guy. He was different, caring and attentive. He'd show up at the hospital when I was pulling late-night shifts, always with a hot meal in tow. He was a breath of fresh air in my otherwise monotonous life. One evening, while we were having dinner at his place, he looked at me, his eyes serious. "Sarah," he said, holding my hand across the table. "I've been doing some thinking. I really like you, more than just a girlfriend. I want us to be a team, you and me. What do you say, will you marry me?" His question caught me off guard. Sure, we hadn't been dating for too long, but there was no denying the love I felt for him. So, I said yes. We were over the moon, excited about our future together. But, boy, was I in for a ride. Little did I know that this decision would lead me down a path full of twists and turns. Life took a sudden turn after that dinner. I was now engaged to Ryan, a man I'd met online, who was as kind and caring as he was committed to his mom. The word fiancée had a new, exciting ring to it. We decided it was time to meet his mom, a woman who lived a couple of hours away in a small town. She was the epicenter of Ryan's world, the person whose opinion mattered the most to him. So, the plan was set: a weekend trip for the two of us to meet the woman who had raised my soon-to-be husband. The drive was filled with a strange tension. Ryan was visibly nervous, his fingers drumming on the steering wheel, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror more often than necessary. He was a man on edge, and it wasn't hard to guess why. "Ryan," I said, trying to soothe his nerves. "Relax. I'm sure your mom is a wonderful person." He shot me a half-smile, his eyes still on the road. "Yeah, she's something all right." His mom's house was a picture of quaint charm, a small structure that looked like it had jumped straight out of a home and garden magazine. As we pulled up, I saw her waiting for us on the porch, a frail figure with a spark of defiance in her eyes. "Ryan, my boy," Margaret exclaimed as soon as we got out of the car, enveloping him in a tight hug. After a moment, she turned to me, her gaze icy. "You must be Sarah." I extended a hand, forcing a smile. "Yes, ma'am. It's a pleasure to meet you." The afternoon was a whirlwind of conversation, a deep dive into Ryan's life and his mom's sacrifices. She painted a vivid picture of their shared journey, of the struggles they'd overcome together. It was touching, but also a bit overwhelming. "So, Sarah," she said at one point, her eyes boring into me. "Ryan tells me you're a nurse." I nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I work at the city hospital." "And your family?" she asked, her gaze never wavering. "Who do you have?" I swallowed, a lump forming in my throat. I don't remember my parents. My grandmother raised me." She nodded, her eyes softening a bit. "Well, I suppose we all have our crosses to bear." The conversation took a strange turn then. She talked about blessing our marriage, but on one condition. We had to keep sending her the monthly $1,000. I was taken aback. I knew Ryan helped her out, but this felt different. It felt like a transaction. "Ma," Ryan said, his voice firm. "We're planning to get married, not sign a contract." Margaret shot him a stern look. "This is not a negotiation, Ryan. It's what I need." Ryan looked at me, his eyes pleading. It was a tough situation, one that I didn't want to escalate. So, I agreed. I agreed to this bizarre condition, for Ryan's sake. The wedding planning kicked off with a bang. Ryan and I were excited, brimming with ideas and dreams for our big day. We had decided on a simple ceremony, something that reflected our love and commitment without breaking the bank. After all, we had a significant monthly commitment to Ryan's mom, which kept our budget modest. But love, we believed, didn't need an extravagant show. Our venue was the local church, a charming little structure with an air of warmth and familiarity. Father John, the pastor and a dear friend of Ryan's, was more than willing to officiate our wedding. His twinkling eyes and hearty congratulations made us feel even more special. The guest list was a short one, a handful of work friends, Ryan's childhood buddies, and, of course, his mom. Margaret had a strong presence in our lives, and her involvement in the wedding planning was no different. She was there at every turn, her opinions shaping our choices, from the color scheme to the menu. "I think we should serve roast beef," she declared during one of our planning sessions. "Ryan loves it." Ryan, ever the dutiful son, nodded in agreement. "But Mom," he added, "Sarah's a vegetarian. We need to consider her too." His mom simply raised an eyebrow. "Well, it's your wedding too, isn't it?" Ryan didn't argue. He simply agreed and let his mom have her way. I didn't mind much. I was too caught up in the joy of marrying the man I loved. But there was another person who was deeply involved in our wedding planning, my grandmother. She was my rock, my guiding light. She had raised me single-handedly, and her wisdom and strength had always been my inspiration. Grandma was thrilled about the wedding. She helped me pick out a simple but elegant white dress. She baked cookies for the reception, her hands working magic in the kitchen. And she was there, always there, with a smile and a word of encouragement. The day of the wedding was a whirlwind of emotions. I was nervous, excited, and a little overwhelmed. Ryan looked dashing in his blue suit, his eyes sparkling with joy. His mom, in a striking red dress, was the life of the party, chatting and laughing with everyone. The ceremony was a beautiful, heartwarming affair. Father John spoke eloquently about love and commitment, his words resonating with everyone present. As Ryan and I exchanged our vows, I could see tears in Grandma's eyes. It was a moment I would cherish forever. The reception, held in the church hall, was a fun-filled event. The roast beef was a hit, and even though I couldn't partake, I was happy to see everyone enjoying it. Ryan's mom made sure to remind everyone that it was her idea. I didn't mind. I was too caught up in the joy of the day. As the day came to a close, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. We were married. We were starting a new chapter in our lives. I knew there would be challenges, but I was ready to face them. I had Ryan, and I had Grandma. I was ready for whatever life had in store for us. In the weeks following our wedding, Ryan and I were on cloud nine. We had moved into a small rented apartment and were slowly settling into our new life together. Our days were filled with love and laughter, and our nights with dreams of a future we were eager to build together. One of our major goals was to save for a down payment on a house. We had a plan, a budget, and a piggy bank that we lovingly called our future home. Every penny we saved was a step closer to our dream. But our financial plan had a significant dent: the $1,000 we sent to Ryan's mom every month. Ryan's mom was a constant presence in our lives, and not always a welcome one. She had a knack for showing up unannounced, often with a list of complaints and demands. Her favorite topic was her financial struggles and how we needed to help her more. One evening, she arrived at our apartment with a stack of papers. "Ryan, dear," she began, her voice dripping with sweetness, "we need to discuss something." Ryan, ever the obedient son, sat down with her, a look of concern on his face. "What is it, Mom?" he asked. She slid a paper across the table to him. "I need you to sign this," she said. It was a contract, a formal agreement that we, all the time we're married, would continue to send her $1,000 every month. But that wasn't all. She also wanted us to cover her utility bills, and part of other costs. Ryan was taken aback. "Mom, we're already helping you out every month. We can't afford all this," he protested. She simply shrugged. "You'll find a way," she said, her voice cold and unfeeling. I was speechless. The audacity of her demand was shocking. But before I could react, Ryan had already signed the contract. He looked at me apologetically. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said. "I didn't see this coming." I was seething with anger, not at Ryan, but at his mother. She was exploiting us, and it wasn't fair. "This isn't right," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "You can't just demand money from us like this." She simply smirked. "I just did." The drive home was a silent one. I was too angry, and Ryan was too guilty. Our dream of owning a home seemed to be slipping away, replaced by a growing pile of bills and obligations. Life was a non-stop roller coaster ride with Ryan and his mother. No matter what we did, it felt like we were always under her microscope, and every move we made was met with her disapproval. It was suffocating, and it was starting to eat away at our happiness. The situation reached boiling point one evening when she came over for her usual uninvited visit. Ryan and I had been discussing the possibility of starting a family. We were excited about the idea of bringing a new life into this world. But when I shared our plans with his mother, her reaction was far from supportive. "A baby? Are you two nuts?" Margaret bellowed, her face turning an alarming shade of red. "You can barely keep your heads above water, and now you want to add a baby to this circus?" I was taken aback by her outburst. "We've thought about this, and we believe we're ready," I countered, trying to keep my voice calm. She snorted. "Ready? You think you're ready? You can't even handle your own lives, and now you want to toss a baby into the mix?" I turned to Ryan, hoping he would step in, but he just sat there, his face ashen. His mother's words had struck a nerve, and he seemed lost for words. "Instead of thinking about a baby, you should be thinking about me," she continued, her voice rising with each word. "I'm not getting any younger. I need you to take care of me, not some snot-nosed brat." I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me. "We're not your babysitters," I snapped, my patience wearing thin. "We have our own lives to live." And we won't let you dictate them. Margaret turned to Ryan, tears welling up in her eyes. Is this how you treat your mother? Is this how you repay me for all I've done for you? Ryan looked at me, then at his mother. I could see the turmoil in his eyes. He was caught between his loyalty to his mother and his love for me. Finally, he spoke up. Mom's right, Sarah, he said, his voice wavering. We're not ready for a baby. We have too many responsibilities already. His words were like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I turned to him, my eyes filled with disbelief. So, you're taking her side now? He didn't answer, just looked down at his hands. That was all the answer I needed. I got up and stormed out of the room, leaving Ryan and his mother alone. That night, Ryan and I had the biggest argument we've ever had. We yelled, we cried, we said things we didn't mean. But in the end, nothing was resolved. He still sided with his mother, and I was left feeling betrayed and alone. The following weeks were a nightmare. Ryan's mother was more intrusive than ever, and Ryan was more distant. As a result, I just stopped communicating with Margaret, even if it was rude, but not seeing her was already a great achievement. She called me an impudent girl and stopped calling me too. I'd been noticing a change in Ryan for a while. He was always on his phone, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he sent text after text. He was coming home late from work, his excuse always the same, just got caught up at the office, babe. I didn't want to believe anything was wrong. I tried to convince myself that it was just work stress, that he was just busy. But deep down, I knew something was off. My suspicions were confirmed when my best friend, Lisa, called me one evening. Sarah, I don't know how to say this, she began, her voice shaking. I found Ryan's profile on that dating site we used to use. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. What? That's impossible, I stammered, my mind racing. He wouldn't. I'm sorry, Sarah, Lisa said, her voice filled with sympathy. I thought you should know. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was right there. When Ryan came home that night, I confronted him. Who is she, Ryan? I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. Who are you texting all the time? Who are you meeting on that dating site? Ryan looked at me, his face pale. I don't know what you're talking about, Sarah, he stammered, his eyes darting around the room. Don't lie to me, Ryan. I yelled, my patience wearing thin. I know about the dating site. I know you're seeing someone else. Ryan didn't say anything for a moment, just stared at me. Then, he let out a sigh. I'm sorry, Sarah, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want you to find out this way. I felt a surge of anger. So, you admit it? You've been cheating on me? Ryan nodded, his eyes filled with guilt. I'm sorry, Sarah. I didn't mean for this to happen. It just did. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The man I loved, the man I had planned to start a family with, was cheating on me. And to make matters worse, he wasn't even sorry about it. I want a divorce, Ryan, I said, my voice steady. I can't be with someone I can't trust. Ryan didn't argue, didn't try to convince me to stay. He just nodded, his face a mask of guilt and regret. 6 months had passed since my divorce from Ryan, and life was starting to settle into a new rhythm. I was learning to live alone, to be independent. Then, my grandmother passed away. She'd been a rock in my life, a woman of strength and wisdom. Her passing left me with a gaping hole, but also, unexpectedly, a considerable inheritance. She'd left me her old mansion, a beautiful house with vast gardens and rooms filled with antique furniture. And there was also a hefty sum of money, enough to let me live comfortably for the rest of my life. I was shocked, overwhelmed, but also grateful. It was a fresh start, a chance to rebuild my life. Just as I was starting to adjust to this new reality, there was a knock on the door. Standing on my doorstep was none other than Ryan's mother, a woman who'd always been a thorn in my side. "Well, look at you, living in luxury," she sneered, looking around the mansion with greedy eyes. "I heard about your little windfall. You must be over the moon." I crossed my arms, raising an eyebrow at her. "What do you want, Margaret?" She put on a saccharine smile, her eyes still scanning the house. "Well, dear, I thought it's only fair that since you and my son are married, I should get a share of this fortune." I couldn't help but laugh. "Margaret, you're out of the loop. Ryan and I divorced 6 months ago." Her eyes widened, and she sputtered. "What? No, that can't be right. Ryan would have told me." "Call him and ask," I suggested, leaning against the doorframe. "He'll confirm it." She pulled out her phone, dialed Ryan's number, and put it on speaker. "Ryan, tell me it's not true," she demanded when he answered. "Tell me you and Sarah are still married." There was a pause, and then Ryan's voice came through, sounding resigned. "No, Mom, we're not. We divorced 6 months ago." Ryan's mom ended the call, her face pale. "You've made a fool of me," she said, her voice trembling. "And you, Ryan, you're an idiot for letting this gold mine slip through your fingers." With that, she turned on her heel and stormed off, leaving me standing in the doorway, shaking with laughter. It felt good to finally stand up to Margaret, to see her taken down a peg. I'd been through a lot, but I was coming out the other side stronger, more confident. My new life was just beginning, and I was ready for whatever came next. I had a beautiful house, financial security, and most importantly, I was free from the shackles of an unhappy marriage. As I closed the door, I couldn't help but smile. Life was looking up. The sun had already started to set when I heard the knock. I opened the door to find my ex-husband, Ryan, standing there. His sudden appearance was as surprising as it was unwelcome. "What the hell are you doing here, Ryan?" I asked, my voice laced with annoyance. I heard about your inheritance, Sarah," he stammered, his eyes darting around the grand entrance of the mansion. "Is it true?" I crossed my arms over my chest, raising an eyebrow at him. "Yeah, it's true. My grandmother left me her house and a substantial amount of money." "What's it to you?" Ryan swallowed hard, his gaze never leaving mine. "I was thinking, maybe we could give it another shot, Sarah," he said, his voice shaky. "I've been a fool. I let my mother dictate our lives. I didn't stand up for you when I should have. I want to make it right." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "Oh, now you want to make it right?" I asked, shaking my head in disbelief. "Now that I'm rich, you suddenly want to be a better man? You think I can't see right through you, Ryan?" Ryan looked taken aback by my words, but he quickly composed himself. "It's not like that, Sarah," he said, his voice filled with desperation. I've changed. I can be a better man. I can make it up to you." I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. I could see the greed in his eyes, the dollar signs practically flashing in his pupils. He was no different from his arrogant mother. He was just after my money. "Listen here, Ryan," I said, my voice cold as ice. "You had your chance. You blew it. Now, you want to waltz back into my life because I've come into some money? You're even more pathetic than I thought." Ryan flinched at my words, but he didn't back down. I just want to make it right, Sarah," he pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper. I just want another chance." I shook my head, a humorless smile on my face. "You're not getting another chance, Ryan," I said, my voice steady. "You're not getting a dime of my money. Now get off my property before I call the cops." With that, I slammed the door in his face, leaving him standing on the doorstep. I could hear him calling out to me, begging for forgiveness, but I ignored him. I had better things to do than listen to his empty promises and pleas. I walked away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I'd finally stood up to Ryan, to his manipulations and his lies. I'd finally stood up for myself. In the weeks that followed, I found myself thinking about Ryan less and less. I was moving on, slowly but surely. I was building a new life for myself, a life that was mine and mine alone. I made new friends, people who liked me for who I was, not for my money or my mansion. I started volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding joy in helping those who couldn't help themselves. I was finally living my life on my own terms, and it felt amazing.